Chapter 201, Scabbers, Stay Away From Me. When Oliver Wood exploded, "Stay away from me." Dylan couldn't help pinching the bridge of his nose. At least he thought he'd finally pushed the boy away. It was only a game. Was it really necessary to be so consumed by competition? Dylan thought of his past life's national football team, hopeless at winning, but somehow still comfortable. This was someone else's passion, not his. Quidditch might bring fame or bragging rights, but little practical benefit to him. He would listen to others, he would offer advice, but he wouldn't let someone else's ambitions swallow him whole, and he wouldn't force people to accept his way of thinking either. Wood, though, Oliver, was another matter. Since arriving at Hogwarts, he'd always been a target of Slytherin taunts, always come up short in matches. He'd thrown himself into Quidditch, become Gryffindor's captain, and wanted victory desperately. That fierce pride and refusal to accept defeat was perfectly normal in a boy on the verge of manhood. Dylan, who felt older in soul and content with quieter things, reading, experiments, eating well, sleeping well, and occasionally striking back at little Voldy, understood the difference. He didn't share Wood's urge to fight over honor and face, but he didn't dismiss it either. Back in his dormitory, Dylan returned to studying the structure of Horcruxes. There were no useful books in the library. Piecing together the principles behind them had to come from experiment and interrogation. He had Tom, the diary, and would question it from time to time about the dark arts. But he trusted Tom Riddle's words no more than halfway. Total skepticism was necessary. Oddly, Dylan had noticed Voldemort reacting less dramatically to Avada Kedavra than before. After a recent hit, the screams weren't as piercing. That unsettled him, and he wanted to investigate further, but he couldn't simply destroy the diary. It was a perfect specimen for research and a convenient way to practice spells. He'd rather damage it partially, use it for study, and even nurture it back toward functionality when useful. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings, he sometimes fed the owls with Luna. Evenings, he'd visit the Forbidden Forest with her to see Sequoia. Days were for classes, and he spent extra time with Dumbledore, learning Gubraithian fire and alchemy when possible. If it wasn't convenient to let his Dementors out during the day, he'd wait until Harry and Ron went to the library, ostensibly to study, and borrow Ron's rat, Scabbers, to feed his creatures. When he wasn't reading or experimenting, he baked small treats. Luna had introduced him to the Hufflepuff common room kitchen. Though she was a Ravenclaw and called odd by many, she got on well with Hufflepuffs and often invited him. Dylan's command of cooking spells impressed her. Once she tasted what he made, she kept inviting him back. Compared with Dylan's unhurried life, Harry's had accelerated. Oliver's incessant morning wake-ups, sometimes at dawn, even on weekends, had Ron and Harry grumbling. Harry had initially been worried Dylan would be roused and annoyed, but Dylan slept through it all. He'd set 3 silencing spells around his bed, so no amount of flailing could wake him. Without Dylan's presence to rein in Oliver, Harry had simply accepted Wood's relentless training schedule. Ron, Seamus, and Neville were mostly out of the picture. Ron often chose sleep over early practice and would only wander down to cheer later. Harry, however, embraced it. Gryffindor hadn't won the Quidditch Cup in years. He was determined to put in the work. One weekend afternoon, after morning practice, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were in the library knee-deep in Charm's homework. Dylan strolled in a little later, glanced at their parchments, and smiled. "Charms again," he said. Ron huffed. "I don't know why Professor Flitwick sets so much. It's like there's more homework than sleep." "You can't finish because you never stop writing," Dylan said lightly. "I sympathize." Ron paused his pen and looked at him. Dylan pulled a few notebooks from his bag and set them on the table. "Flitwick made me do similar exercises. Want to take a look?" Ron's eyes brightened. "Really? May I?" "Of course, just for reference. Understand the method so you don't flunk the exam." "Thanks, Dylan. You're the best." Dylan smiled. "By the way, can I borrow your Scabbers for a bit?" Ron blinked. "You're going to study a rat's anatomy again?" "Yeah. It's curious how Scabbers has lasted so long. I want to compare him to ordinary rats." Ron considered their overflowing textbooks and nodded. "He's getting old. Take good care of him, yeah?" He reached into his jumper and pulled out the bedraggled one-toed rat. Scabbers, feeling the change in the air, froze. His tiny claws scrabbled at Ron's sweater, his whiskers quivering. "Hey, don't wreck my jumper. I've only got one of these," Ron scolded and grabbed Scabbers by the tail. The rat let out a high, terrified squeal, clawing to dig back into the safety of Ron's sleeve. Dylan didn't take him right away. Instead, with a casual flick of his wand, he cast a silencing charm. The rat's frantic squeaks continued, with mouths opening and closing, but not a sound escaped. Only then did Dylan scoop Scabbers up and tuck him into his pocket. "Take my notebooks back when you're done," Dylan told them. "I'll be in the dormitory." Ron nodded and went back to copying notes as if nothing important had occurred. Harry peered over at the papers, curious. Hermione, however, frowned. "That's not helpful," she said, frowning at Dylan. "If people don't do their own homework, how will they learn anything for the exams?" Dylan blinked, genuinely perplexed. "You mean we shouldn't let them use references?" Ron and Harry chimed in at once. "We're not copying." Hermione ignored them and turned toward Dylan. Then, Dylan tapped a neat notebook lying by Harry. "You lent your homework to Harry last term, didn't you? Something happened to you last year, and no one could help with revision. Next year, you'll lead the review sessions and help them earn a good grade." Hermione's cheeks flushed the color of dragon's blood. Her fingers nervously toyed with the parchment edge. Her curly hair fell to hide her blush. "Oh, she stammered. "I just write things down out of habit. I'm not." "You're brilliant," Dylan said, winking. "Everyone at Hogwarts knows it." He stood, waved, and left. Hermione watched him go, fingers still twisting the paper. Ron noticed her odd behavior and teased. "You're red as a boiled beet, Hermione. Dylan praised you, didn't he?" "Shut up," she snapped, nearly knocking over an ink bottle in her fluster. "I was just surprised. Come on, get back to work," Ron grumbled, though he looked pleased to see her ruffled. Dylan returned to the dormitory alone. The room was empty. He slipped his hand into his pocket and felt the small, trembling body of Scabbers. He drew the rat out to inspect the missing toe, the patchy fur, the little whiskers that quivered like fine threads. Scabbers' eyes were huge, terrified. He didn't seem to register Dylan at all, only the fearful presence of this young wizard and the instinct that danger lurked close. Dylan smiled and settled to his work. Scabbers, curling into himself, was still convinced this human meant harm. Chapter 202, Hufflepuff's Secret Oven, an Alchemical Creation? Dylan carried Scabbers directly into the cramped pocket of his suitcase, and then walked straight to the isolated island where 7 Dementors drifted like ragged shadows. It was afternoon, but the light there was pallid and weak. The gray-blue sky hung low, and the sea beyond glinted a cold silver. Dylan held the rat by the scruff with 3 fingers, ignoring its frantic struggles. The animal, Peter Pettigrew, now little more than a squeaking, furred thing, trembled all over the moment they arrived. Something in the fog stirred. Dementors with hollow faces and tattered cloaks were drifting closer. Scabbers' round eyes locked on them, and his body stiffened. "Squeak!" he shrieked. "Where is this boy taking me? How could there be so many Dementors here?" "Run!" Pettigrew thought desperately. But Dylan stood as if rooted to the spot, as if he saw nothing terrifying at all. "You idiot," Pettigrew raged silently. "If he dies, how will I ever get away?" He dared not thrash too wildly. Being too human-like would only attract the Dementor's attention. He folded his head in, hoping to be as inconspicuous as possible. The Dementors accelerated, not daring to be slow. In a short time, the 7 black-robed figures had formed a line along the beach. They hovered in front of Dylan in a flat row, A through G. A, the first in line, bent forward first. Its hollow face came close to the rat. Scabbers' fur bristled. He wanted to curse Dylan for bringing him here and for being so careless, but the Dementor ignored Dylan, a living person, and leaned straight toward him. Cold like a bone spreading through him, Pettigrew's whiskers trembled. "Squeak!" The rat tried to shriek, but the sound was swallowed as the Dementor drew close. "Just a little," Dylan said quietly to Dementor A. "Don't take too much." A nodded and began to feed. After a while, it felt like there was nothing nourishing in the rat. What remained were ugly, fragmented memories that were hard to swallow. It did not dare to explain the situation to its master, Dylan, who might at any moment reveal himself as something monstrously different. And so the Dementor simply took what it could, the hollow scraps of feeling threaded through the rat's fragile mind. An animal's emotions, it found, were far meeker than a human soul. After it had its fill, the others took turns. Only when the 7 had each taken a little did Dylan pluck the limp creature back from their mouths. "All right, go soak in the stagnant water," he said, waving his hand. The Dementors dispersed as if dismissed. Dylan's figure flickered, and he stepped out of the suitcase space. Scabbers hung limp in his palm. Dylan smiled and swept his wand in a small arc. Obliviate. Scabbers' whiskers twitched once. Dylan had wiped the rodent's memory of having been in his world. He then tossed the unconscious rat onto Ron's bedside and cast a restraint spell to keep it from running. After scattering some food to the other animals inside his storage space, he sat in the dormitory chair and lost himself in books until dinner time. Later, carrying Scabbers again, he went down to the Great Hall. Ron and Harry returned from the library at the same time. They must have finished consulting tomes for homework. Dylan scraped the last of a creamy seafood porridge from his plate with a knife, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and picked up a small dessert when Ron nudged him. "Hey, Dylan, over there," Ron said with a wink. Dylan looked where Ron pointed. Luna was coming over from the Ravenclaw table, her seaweed-like platinum hair shaking as she walked. Instead of the usual carrot earrings, she now wore a small pinned specimen of an unknown insect. "Your bread roll seems to be winking at me," she announced, strolling up and smiling at the buttered bun in Dylan's hand. "Does it want to become a raven and go see the homping willow bloom?" Ron blinked at the strangeness. A bread roll? A raven? Typical Luna. Dylan, with the roll still in his mouth, chewed, cheeks puffed, and answered in a mouthful, "More than flying bread. I want to know if the secret oven you mentioned in the Hufflepuff basement really exists." Luna found his puffed cheeks oddly endearing and went serious. "Of course. I saw it last time." "Secret oven?" Ron leaned forward. "What is that?" Luna explained, matter of fact as ever. "A very magical oven. I used it once to bake a rock cake with feathers. It could fly, although not very far." "Because the rock cake was too heavy?" Ron asked. "Yes," Luna nodded. "It still managed a little flight." Ron's eyebrows shot up. "You bake rock cakes? Do they taste good?" Luna thought a moment. "I think they're okay. Don't overbake them. They're actually quite crisp." "Crisp?" Ron repeated. "The wings the secret oven bakes on the cake are especially crisp and tasty," Luna added simply. Hermione frowned. "Where in Hufflepuff is this secret oven?" Luna blinked at her. "It can move and turn invisible. I think it's some kind of magical object, so I call it the secret oven." Doubt warred with curiosity across Hermione's face. Dylan chipped in. "There are quite a few strange enchanted kitchen things in Hufflepuff. This could be one of their treasures." Hermione shot Dylan a look that clearly said bring. "Are you serious?" He smiled at her. "No need to doubt. Dumbledore told me about it. I mentioned it to Luna before, and she managed to find it." "How did you see it?" Dylan asked Luna. "Just walked over," she said simply. Dylan blinked. "And found it?" "Yes." Watching them, Ron muttered to nobody in particular. "These two have good chemistry." Luna added, "The other Hufflepuffs were surprised when it appeared again." "I've heard rumors in Hufflepuff about unusual magical kitchen utensils," Dylan said casually, wiping an imaginary bead of sweat from his forehead. He'd been to the Hufflepuff kitchen with Luna before and had never seen much beyond ordinary tools. It intrigued him that she had stumbled across an actual mysterious oven. "Do you want to go see it with me?" "I think it's still there," Luna asked. "Of course," Dylan said, finishing his water and standing up. "I'll head off now." Neville nodded first. Ron grinned. "Go on, bring back some of the baked food." He'd enjoyed a cookie Dylan had once given him. Harry agreed, while Hermione, sitting across from them, snorted. "You'd be better off reading more than wasting time on this." As Dylan and Luna left, Ron shot Hermione a look. "Why do I feel like someone isn't very happy about Dylan wandering around?" Hermione glared. "Eat your food." "Can't even tell the truth with me," Ron said under his breath as he cut a piece of steak. Dylan and Luna slipped into the east side of Hufflepuff's kitchen, and there, in a dim corner, an unremarkable oven sat on a table. It looked almost ordinary until Dylan circled it and felt the faint, layered hum of something like alchemy radiating from its metal. "It's here," Luna said. Dylan frowned thoughtfully. "Hufflepuff isn't known for being great at alchemy, are they? Their strengths are more practical, food-related magic, and the earth element. Could this oven be an alchemical creation from long ago? He probed the notion with his mind. Alchemy linked deeply with the earth element, and Hufflepuff's tradition with kitchen magic made the idea plausible. Maybe it wasn't just a simple enchanted oven. Perhaps it was an alchemical artifact, or an alchemical device later enhanced with cooking spells. "Can it transform what you bake?" he asked Luna, remembering the flying rock cake. "Seems so," she said. "At least I didn't shape wings onto that cake myself." Dylan stared at the oven and felt a flicker of hunger for discovery. There were so many oddities around Hogwarts he hadn't cataloged yet. He mentally entertained a fantastical thought. If he could take them into his suitcase space, he could move much of the school there and host anyone who wanted to study. He could even waive tuition for the poor and charge the rich. Malfoy could pay 100,000 galleons a year if he liked. "Okay," Luna said, pulling him back to the present. "What should we make?" "Cookies," Dylan decided. "Convenient, quick, and delicious." Luna nodded and reached up on tiptoe for a bag of flour. Dylan returned with 2 aprons. He wrapped one around her shoulders. The cloth brushed her nose and she sneezed softly. "Sorry," she murmured. "You're welcome," Dylan said, helping tie the apron at her waist. Luna's hair slipped and brushed his wrist. She laughed. "Tickles." He nearly tied the knot crooked but steadied himself. They mixed the dough, not by hand but with small spells that made the process fast. For the final step, Dylan refused to shortcut the work entirely. He wanted to see how the oven would react when ordinary cookies, not pre-shaped magically, were introduced. Whether this oven was a purely alchemical device or an alchemical creation layered with culinary enchantments, he intended to find out. Chapter 203, An Oven That Can Increase Mental Strength? Is it really one of the treasures? Then I'll put it in. Luna, wearing gloves, picked up the baking tray and slid the cookies into the oven. Dylan nodded and watched her from the side. The oven looked ordinary, old, simple, not many functions. Luna squatted and pushed the tray all the way in. "Did ovens even exist back in Hufflepuff's day?" she asked. Dylan didn't know. His books never covered domestic appliances. Luna turned the knob. At the second click, a faint rattle of gears came from inside. "That should do it." She straightened and stepped back to Dylan's side. "We won't have to wait long. When I baked a cake here before, it seemed to have a bit of magic. It cooks things very quickly." Dylan didn't answer. He stared at the oven. As it started up, he felt rune light crawl along engraved patterns on its body, alchemy marks. The light gathered at the top of the furnace and formed a pulsating flame that enveloped the tray. It didn't touch the cookies directly. It surrounded them, heating and enchanting the dough. Dylan had worked with fiend fire and Gubrathian fire. He knew fire, and he'd never seen this before. It felt familiar in its power, however. "Cooking fire?" he murmured. The thought came to him like a key turning. The flame behaved like a spell tuned specifically for cooking, an array of magic integrated with heat. If cooking could be bound into fire this way, then other spells could be encoded into objects with similar arrays. He thought of the jade stones he'd made for the Weasleys, the life-saving gear for his parents. Weren't those also spells trapped in patterns? Even Gubrathian fire had been born the same way. Magic as the base, mana as thread, condensed into flame and an array simultaneously. "Look, they're changing," Luna said suddenly, pointing at the oven. Dylan blinked and pressed his face to the small observation window. Under the heat, the cookies were transforming. One in the upper left swelled with pearl-like white beads that fused into a translucent crystalline web, like frozen honey bubbles. One on the right exuded a pale purple sap that twisted up into mushroom-shaped caps, emitting tiny glowing flecks between their gills, like spores. A row of cookies cracked open and spilled silvery, silky fluff that almost edible, like powdered sugar. They were all different, so it wasn't just the flame. Either the fire had multiple functions he hadn't recognized, or this oven's enchantments wove together several effects. Combining multiple spells in one alchemical device was tricky. Doing so in such a compact, domestic way was unusual. Dylan couldn't sense a transfiguration charm overtly, so how did the cookies undergo such bizarre alterations? His mind raced. If he could remove the flame and study it, tweak the arrays, he might produce a culinary fire that could cook without physical ingredients. He'd imagined creating a house elf substitute with enchanted appliances. The possibilities made his pulse quicken. A broken oven from Hufflepuff was giving him far more ideas than a broken sword from Gryffindor or a rotten relic from Slytherin ever could. How many surprises hid in Hogwarts? They fell into a companionable silence. Luna watched the oven hum. Every so often, she flipped a strand of flour-dusted hair out of her face. The warm sweetness from the oven mixed with the heat and made the corner feel hushed. Dylan noticed Luna's shoulders rise and fall in a quiet rhythm, the oven's glow painting her cheek and throwing the shadow of her lashes across her face. When the oven chimed, a soft ding, she reached for the handle. Warm yellow light pooled out when she opened the door, outlining Luna's jaw. The light hit her hair, making it shine. The flower stuck in her strands glittered like ground moonlight. Her eyes curved in a faint smile. For a moment, she looked almost ethereal, the kind of gentle beauty that felt comforting rather than striking, like the first buds after melting snow. Dylan felt suddenly flustered. "What are you looking at?" Luna asked, tilting her head. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "You just look beautiful." Luna blinked in surprise, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "Do I look beautiful?" "Yes," Dylan said seriously, then added with a quick, awkward thumbs up, "You really do." "Thank you. Besides my family, you're the first person to compliment me like that," she said, and her smile became softer. "The cookies are done," she added, opening the oven fully. A wave of caramel-sweet heat washed over them. She smoothed the hair that had been mussed by the heat. Her ears went a faint pink. "Which one do you want to try first?" she asked. "Anything," Dylan said, clearing his throat. He used his wand to lift the tray and set it on the table with care, keeping Luna from burning herself. She left the oven door slightly ajar to let the heat out and sat back down beside him. She poked a cookie with her fingertip, crispy at the edge with little round beads on top. "This looks like peas growing on a biscuit," she observed. Dylan watched her with a soft, sidelong glance. Her hair fell over half an eye. Her focus made her look adorable. He picked up the cookie she pointed at and took a bite. Caramel sweetness spread first, then a cool hint of mint. The beads on the surface were crisp. As he swallowed, something shifted inside him. The flow of his magic changed. "Huh?" He raised an eyebrow, looking at Luna. She had tilted her head and was studying a cookie with transparent, tentacle-like protrusions. Dylan took another bite and felt the change again. Clarity, a lightness not of the body but of the mind, like a mirror freshly cleaned, distant sounds becoming pricklingly distinct. The magic in him seemed to move more smoothly. Luna looked up through a mouthful of cookie. "Did you feel that?" "What was that?" she asked, though her face already bore surprise. "I ate one too, and my head felt calmer. My magic flowed differently." "You felt it too?" Dylan said. He picked up another cookie, one with white frosting, and watched as Luna examined it, then ate it. Her eyes widened. "It's true," she said. "When I baked a cake here before, I only thought it was delicious and wanted more. But this actually affects you." Dylan stared at the battered oven in the corner. "It's not just an oven." "When I found it," Luna said, "it had just appeared. It was invisible, and then it was there." "If that's so," Dylan said slowly, "there's another possibility. Maybe it apparated here." "Apparated?" Luna repeated. "You mean apparition?" "I mean, it could have apparated. There are so many alchemical runes on it that a lot could be going on," he frowned. "If it had always been here, someone would have noticed it by now, unless it appears and disappears." Luna considered that. "But this is Hufflepuff's kitchen. If it belonged here forever, surely someone would have seen it." "Well," Dylan said, thinking, "we should ask around." His desire to spirit the oven away and study it at leisure became urgent. He divided the cookies into two piles. Luna didn't refuse his offer to take some. After he cleaned the tray with a quick charm, he turned back toward the oven. "Hufflepuff's treasure. Could it be this?" he mused aloud. Luna watched him a moment, then asked, hesitant, "Do you want to take it?" "Huh? What?" Chapter 204, Crookshanks and Scabbers, Who Don't Get Along. Dylan stared at Luna, surprised. She cocked her head and asked again, blunt as ever, "Are you going to take that oven?" He couldn't help a twitch of a smile. How was it that this girl acted more like a thief than he did? He laughed dryly and shook his head. "It's Hufflepuff's oven. We'll wait and ask the Hufflepuffs at Hogwarts about it first, then decide." He wasn't going to pocket it right away. Open, brazen theft wasn't his style. Luna's expression shifted as if she'd been rebuked. Then she added, casual as if announcing a shopping list, "If we find out where the oven came from, we can see if Hufflepuff has other secret kitchen utensils. Then we can just take them all." Dylan blinked. "Anyway, we'll talk about it later. It's getting late. I'm going back to read a bit more," he said. "No problem. I need to look through some old books too," Luna replied with a little nod. After Dylan tidied the kitchen, he left the Hufflepuff kitchens with her. They said goodbye, and he hurried back toward his dormitory, muttering to himself all the way up to the Gryffindor Tower. "That girl is terrifying. If I hang around her for too long, I'll get dragged into all sorts of nonsense." When he reached the common room, he found it far from empty. A crowd clustered around the notice board. Dylan pushed his way over and squinted at the new post. Hogsmeade permission notices. It explained when students could visit Hogsmeade next, not on a regular school night, but on the weekend. Late October, the weekend before Halloween. He remembered the permission form being sent with his book list at the start of term. Guardian consent was required. His parents had signed theirs in a hurry. They'd been eager to have him home for the first few days of the holidays, and then couldn't wait to send him back to Hogwarts so they could get on with their lives. So they signed without fuss. Hogsmeade. For Dylan, it held no special danger. He even owned a property there, by accident. When he had used Soul Bob Tongue on Lockhart, he'd found in Lockhart's fractured memories a house Lockhart had bought in Hogsmeade. Dylan had appropriated it. This trip would be a good chance to turn that property into a safe house, his closest one to Hogwarts. Even if the school had anti-apparition wards, the house would let him get to and from the castle quickly, whether to return or to flee. He made for the dormitory door and halted when he spotted Crookshanks a few feet away, hunched and pawing at a glass bead. Hermione's large, ginger cat had the pancake-like face that made him look perpetually flattened. His narrow eyes had the sleepy, clever expression of a Kneazle in a cat's body, and his bushy tail flicked with a small curl at the tip. "Little fellow, what are you doing by my door? Is something wrong?" Dylan asked. Crookshanks looked up and meowed, tail flicking twice. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "You want to play with Coal Ball?" The cat bobbed his head and then tilted his head, puzzlement in his eyes. Dylan chuckled. "Your owner leaves you in the dormitory a lot, so we haven't met much. Don't be surprised. I can understand what you're saying. It's not hard." He felt he should explain that he hadn't killed any cat intentionally. During the summer, he'd come upon a man who tortured cats in an alley. Dylan had drawn out the man's soul, discovered he was also a serial killer, and turned him into an inferius. The abused cat had been left clinging to life. Dylan hadn't wanted the little animal to continue suffering. He had sent it on, and through Soul Bob Tongue, the cat's spirit had become part of him. It wasn't a murder in Dylan's book, but a mercy. Crookshanks stared at him, eyes widening in surprise. Okay, Dylan said, waving a hand. "Didn't you want to play with Coal Ball?" Coal Ball, the little black egg-shaped pet Dylan kept in his pocket dimension, had appeared on Ron's bed, currently stretched out atop Ron's rat, Scabbers. Ron turned at the sound of the door and brightened. "Dylan, you're finally here. Get that little black devil away from my rat. He looks like he wants to eat Scabbers." Dylan stepped inside, and Crookshanks slipped through the doorway as if he'd been there 1,000 times. The cat hopped onto the nearest bed, purring, then noticed Coal Ball and ran over in a burst of feline excitement. "Hey, how did he get here?" Ron exclaimed. "My rat's not for two cats." "Coal Ball isn't a cat," Dylan corrected. "But he wants to eat Scabbers." Ron protested, hovering at the bedside, watching Scabbers pinned by a little black paw and trying to make himself invisible. "Don't worry," Dylan said. "Coal Ball won't eat him, they're just playing." At that, Crookshanks leapt, tail fluffed high, and landed gracefully on Ron's mattress. His tail brushed Scabbers' nose. The cat crouched, eyes intent, and opened his mouth with a sharp yowl, going in to bite. "Wait!" Ron cried. At that instant, Coal Ball reached out with his other paw and blocked Crookshanks' head. The cat looked up, surprised. Crookshanks had Kneazle blood, clever and proud, but affectionate toward creatures he fancied, and he liked Coal Ball. He wasn't angry so much as bewildered that the little black thing would stop him from sinking his teeth into that rat. The rat had a strange smell that made Crookshanks uneasy. Coldball pressed his paw against the ginger cat's forehead in a slow, languid motion and looked at him with a sleepy, unreadable expression. Then, in a tone that Dylan could understand as clearly as if words had been spoken, Coldball said, "Old Ginger, this rat belongs to my master. Don't bite him. He's useful." Dylan didn't bother to deny it. Yes, Scabbers is useful. Crookshanks drew back indignantly. But next time you're not around, I'm totally going to eat that rat. Merlin's underpants won't stop me. Dylan nearly laughed out loud. Who told you that phrase? Of course. Crookshanks meowed a few times, then cocked his head and glanced at Ron, who looked both utterly bewildered and a little worried. Ron's eyes darted back and forth between Coldball, Crookshanks, and Dylan. Wait, Dylan, you were talking to them just now? That's right, I was talking to them. How can you talk to cats? Are you a cat? Ron asked, incredulous. Dylan's mouth quirked into a mischievous grin, and he dropped his voice. Do you want to know? Ron jumped up, suddenly eager to leave. Haha, never mind. It's probably best to let them play. Harry's waiting for me on the Quidditch pitch. I'm off. He dashed for the door, paused at the latch, and called back. Keep an eye on Scabbers for me. Don't let him get bullied, especially not by Hermione's cat. I don't know what Crookshanks is doing in our dormitory. With that, he was gone, the door closing and thudding soundlessly as it latched. Dylan watched it swing shut, shook his head, and settled down to read. Want to play? Coldball asked, lifting his chin toward him. Moo, Crookshanks replied, sitting beside the little black thing and watching him intently. You look a lot like me, Coldball remarked, puzzled. Crookshanks stared. Coldball eased his paw off Scabbers. The poor rat, though free, didn't dare move. He curled into himself and tried to be as small as possible. Dylan ignored their chatter and turned back to the pile of books on his desk. He'd been reading Hogwarts histories, hunting for any mention of secret kitchen utensils or the mysterious oven they'd found. But there was nothing. No trace of a hidden oven in the Hufflepuff kitchens, no notes in the records he had. He frowned. It was odd. If an oven like that existed, someone had to have found it before. Why wasn't there a single mention in any of these books? Not everything showed up in ordinary histories, he reminded himself. The Room of Requirement wasn't recorded in regular histories either, and everyone knew it existed. Chapter 205, Hermione and Ron had a falling out? They're really just a bunch of cute kids. Morning, herbology class. Dylan, Neville, and Seamus were crouched around a bubblehead tree. Dylan knelt in its dappled shade, and just as his fingertips brushed a pink pod the size of a pigeon's egg, he heard Seamus muttering beside him. This looks just like the tassel on Professor Flitwick's top hat the other day. Neville chuckled and swept branches aside with his gloved hand, making a soft rustle. Professor Sprout said to pick the ones with white stripes at the base. Don't get it wrong. I heard a third-year Slytherin picked a completely pink one last week and ended up with boils all over their face, like they'd smeared strawberry cake on it. Seamus finished, nodding vigorously. Oh, that description. Neville was taken aback. I think I'm like Dean too, and I've got the whole Dylan thing down. Seamus winked his left eye. Dylan glanced at him, his eyelid twitched. He didn't know why he felt suddenly irritated. Dylan pinched the seam of the pod with his gloved fingernail. A gelatinous sap gushed out, forming pale green bubbles in his palm. With a flick of his wrist, he scraped the sap into a copper basin. In the sunlight, the bubbles popped into tiny specks, releasing the fresh scent of earth and grass that spread around them. Seamus gave a low cry. A pod in his hand suddenly burst into fluffy lint that dusted his eyelashes. Merlin's beard. This thing's harder to handle than Peeves. How could it? Another pod popped with a loud pop, splattering sticky sap across his sleeve. Neville hurried over with a wooden spoon. Quick, scrape it off with this. Dylan watched them fumble for a moment, then sighed. Scourgify. He still held 2 pods, but didn't raise his wand. The spell slipped from his lips, and his magic radiated outward. The sticky sap on Seamus's sleeve vanished instantly. Thanks, Seamus breathed, relieved. Dylan, your magic seems to be getting stronger. Neville blinked. No, Dylan's always been brilliant. Seamus nodded. Yeah, you're right. Dylan pursed his lips. Remember, cut from the bottom third. Don't touch or squeeze the top of the pod with your bare hands. Seamus hesitated, looking at Dylan working with his hands uncovered. But, Dylan raised a hand. Don't copy me. I'm wrapping my hands in magic. It looks like I'm using my bare hands, but the magic forms a shield, sometimes even blades. Okay. Seamus glanced toward where Ron and Harry were sitting not far away. I think Ron and Hermione are a bit off today. Why do you say that? Dylan looked up. He hadn't paid much attention to them earlier. He usually created a silent zone around his bed each night, both to sleep and to sneak off to the Forbidden Forest without waking anyone. Neville scooped shimmering beans into a wooden barrel. Dewdrops clung to their golden-green skins, and if a bean fell, it would bloom immediately and be useless for the assignment. I might know. Neville lowered his hand and peered toward Ron. Last night, I don't know what happened with Ron's rat. He was talking to it late. He wasn't loud, but it kept me awake. Why didn't you just silence it with magic? Dylan raised an eyebrow. Neville looked embarrassed, his gloved hands still streaked with sap. I wanted to, but you have to use your wand and speak the spell. He glanced at Dylan sheepishly. I can't do wandless spells like you. I was worried Ron would hear me and think I was complaining he was noisy. That would be awkward. Dylan stared. Seamus snorted. I get that. That happens with Dean too. Dylan clicked his tongue. He couldn't quite understand how anxious they all were about saying the wrong thing. Kids, he thought. Simple and always thinking of others. Kind of cute. He also thought, not very seriously, that if someone kept him awake at night, he'd get up and hex them into feeling the disadvantages of no sleep, maybe even use a crude hex to teach them a lesson, especially if they stayed up themselves and kept others awake. Anyway, Ron and Hermione don't want to talk to each other, Seamus went on. Look at Harry. They all watched. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione under another bubblehead tree. The three of them were together, but the atmosphere was stiff. Ron prodded podsap in his basin, while Hermione twirled her wand and stared away. Harry kept glancing from one to the other, opening his mouth and closing it again. The tension pinned him silent. Clearly they'd had a falling out. Dylan let out a small laugh. Harry's the one suffering. Look at him. Ron and Hermione aren't doing any of the work, and he's stuck doing it. Neville tried to stifle a grin. Tell me about it. They managed to get through the rest of class. Everyone used spells to wash the sap and mud from their robes, and then the Gryffindors hurried off for their next lessons. Dylan walked along the path with Neville, chatting idly while Seamus dashed off with Dean. When they reached the Transfiguration classroom door, a small crowd had gathered, and people looked restless. Dylan pushed closer. Hermione stood a short distance away, having left Harry and the others as soon as herbology ended, maybe because she wanted some space. Dylan moved up, and as he approached, Hermione's gaze flicked to Lavender, who sobbed not far off. Her rabbit got killed by a fox, Lavender wailed, clutching an empty cage. She says it's Professor Trelawney's prophecy coming true. Prophecy, Dylan echoed. On the 16th of October, what you most dread will come to pass before your eyes, Hermione recited. Hermione rolled her eyes. But the rabbit was bitten yesterday. And when Lavender's boggart came out, she traced a circle in the air with her fingertip. It was a classroom full of bloody teeth, not a rabbit. How is that what she most dreads? From the doorway, Lavender shivered and continued to cry. Hermione kept talking. Trelawney's predictions are just playing the odds. If anything mundane happens, someone drops a kettle, someone gets hit by a stray ball, or loses a hair tie, she can claim the prophecy came true. That makes her foresight seem accurate. Hermione, can't you have some sympathy? Someone protested. Ron worked his way over and rolled his eyes at Hermione. Her rabbit's gone. Stop arguing about boggarts. That was a life you're dismissing. Hermione was momentarily taken aback by the bluntness. She took 2 deep breaths and turned to Dylan instead. Why can't people let their logic turn a couple of notches before jumping to conclusions? Dylan watched her and then spoke quietly. Not everyone thinks the way you do, Hermione. Sometimes it's better not to interfere too much in other people's beliefs. If you try to change someone's life path, you have to be ready to deal with the consequences. He hesitated, then added, Of course, if someone you care about needs help, forget I said that. Hermione looked struck. Dylan didn't elaborate, but for a moment he thought of the future, of how Hermione would one day campaign for house elf rights and face backlash for it. She would know there would be targeting and ostracism and still press forward. That was Hermione. Professor McGonagall appeared at the other end of the corridor and frowned at the students blocking her doorway. "What are you all doing at the door? Move along and take your places." Lavender, too upset to cry anymore, clutched her empty cage and entered the classroom. McGonagall kept the lesson straightforward, reviewing what they had learned previously and reinforcing it. The tension between Ron and Hermione made the room feel colder. Harry, stuck in the middle, felt like he was trapped in an ice cave. He shivered and couldn't warm up. When class ended, the bell rang and Professor McGonagall called a halt. "Don't rush off yet." Everyone looked up. "As your head of house, I must collect permission forms for Hogsmeade before Halloween," she said, adjusting her glasses and tapping the podium. "Anyone without a form will not be allowed to go." Students rummaged in bags and handed over their forms, Hermione included. A few hadn't brought theirs and were told to produce them by the next Transfiguration lesson. Neville suddenly went rigid when McGonagall mentioned Hogsmeade. His face fell miserable. After the others had filed their forms, Neville stepped forward, shy and trembling, head bowed. "I'm sorry, Professor." McGonagall's hawk-like gaze landed on him. Neville braced for a scolding, but she shook her head. "Your form is already with me, Mr. Longbottom." Neville gaped in disbelief. "Huh? But I left it at home." "Your grandmother sent it to me at the start of term," McGonagall said calmly. "She thought it would be safer." Neville exhaled, relief flooding him. After McGonagall dismissed the class, he followed Dylan out the door. "Dylan, have you thought about what you want to do in Hogsmeade? Like where to go?" Dylan knew Neville meant Hogsmeade. He had already planned it. The Weasley twins said their friend saw some new things at Honeyduke's. "They sounded good. I'll go check them out." Neville's face lit up. "We can finally walk around. I'll go with you and see the sweet shop." "Fine by me," Dylan answered casually. Hogsmeade wasn't interesting to him, a village mostly of shops for wizards and kids who'd been cooped up in Hogwarts too long. There were a few places worth seeing. Honeyduke's, Zonko's joke shop, some clothing stores, but nowhere to really play. The excitement was less about Hogsmeade itself and more about the break from routine, like a primary school field trip. After weeks of waking, studying, sleeping, and repeating, even a simple walk felt like a special outing. Chapter 206, Spell, Rationale, Dream Curse. "I want to go to Zonko's, Dylan. Do you want to come?" Neville asked. Dylan hesitated a moment, then shook his head. "Not really." Neville blinked. There weren't many shops in Hogsmeade. If not Zonko's, where else? Seamus said Dean told him Zonko's has loads of weird things, stuff we never see in the castle. Neville looked around conspiratorially and lowered his voice. "Seamus and Dean even brought galleons. They're planning to buy a lot." Dylan raised an eyebrow at the mention of the purchases. "It'll all be contraband." Neville grinned. "Most of it, yeah." "Seamus told you that in secret?" Dylan shrugged. "I don't care for gossip. And honestly, the Weasley twins have already made a lot of that stuff." "I saw someone doing private deals with them a few days ago," Neville said. "So rather than buying from Zonko's, might as well support our classmates." "That's fair," Dylan shrugged. "Fred and George's stuff is more interesting than Zonko's anyway." Neville thought about it and nodded. "Last week they made a canary cream. Looks like a biscuit, but it turns you into a huge canary. You have to wait a minute for the feathers to drop before you turn back." Dylan smiled faintly. "I know. That kind of prop needs a strong transfiguration. They even asked me for advice." "You did?" Neville's face lit up. "I couldn't figure out how they managed it. They were talking about that project last year, and nothing happened for ages. Then suddenly the final product." Dylan waved a hand offhandedly. "Zonko's stock hasn't changed much for a long time. Give Fred and George time. They'll open a better joke shop, and it'll be famous across the country." They walked on, chatting, when two voices cut in behind them. "My old Merlin's smelly boots. What did I just hear?" "A third-year divination master, certified by Professor Trelawney." "That's right. Exactly." Dylan's eyelids twitched. The twins had overheard. He tried to clarify. "What I meant was later." But the Weasleys didn't give him a chance. They swooped in, grinning. "Dylan, Why didn't you say you supported us? Come on, say it to our faces. Compliment us properly. George bumped Dylan's shoulder, smiling so hard his nose wrinkled. Fred shoved George forward, forcing Dylan closer to the wall. Tell us, what's your favorite thing we've made? The sound whistle that filled the Slytherin dungeons with donkey calls? Or the flashy flower that made a star rain in the Hufflepuff kitchens? Dylan felt pushed back and forth between them. He couldn't help a corner of his mouth twitch. His eyes sharpened. Far E. I'm George, George said. Realizing they'd gone too far, the twins stepped back, hands up. Right. Come on, we've got a new gadget in the dorm we want you to see. Quick, let's go. They bolted off, promising over their shoulders, We'll meet you in Hogsmeade. No, at Honeyduke's. We've got a secret weapon for you, Dylan sighed. Neville watched them go, blinking slowly. All right, let's head out, Dylan said. He was getting hungry. The days slipped by quickly. As Halloween approached, although Hogwarts was still buzzing with tension over the Dementors, the third years were thrilled at the first chance to go to Hogsmeade on their own. Even during lessons, they seemed more lively, Professor Snape's potions class in particular. Despite Snape's usual sneering bias against Gryffindor, the students obeyed and followed instructions so completely that Snape seemed taken aback, only to scold and dock points again, equal opportunity cruelty, his way of teaching. On the morning of the trip, the castle filled with students. Filch, looking like a badly groomed old cat, stood in the entrance archway as if glued there. His hooked nose practically poked every student who passed. He clutched a long parchment, the list nearly dragging on the stone. No one not on the list is allowed through, he barked. If I catch anyone sneaking out, you'll be in trouble. I'll get your head of house to come and take you back. Filch's voice grated like a rusty saw. By the time Dylan reached the line, Luna had appeared at his side and Neville followed close behind, shy. Luna watched Filch intently, as if studying some odd magical specimen. Dylan glanced at her. It seemed Luna could find interest in anyone. I'll go first, Dylan told Neville. Watch Luna for me, and say hello to Mist for me. Luna thought a second, then said softly, If you see any rare creatures while you're there, tell me when you get back. Dylan chuckled. I won't hold my breath. If there were undiscovered creatures roaming Hogsmeade, someone would have found them already. Luna nodded. Her pale hair fluttered in the breeze as she drifted away in another direction. Neville followed Dylan into the crowd. He seemed oddly relieved. Harry said his uncle and aunt absolutely refused to sign his permission slip, he told Dylan. Dylan's brow lifted. Why hasn't Harry mentioned that to me? Maybe, because you haven't been talking to him much lately, Neville suggested. Dylan frowned. He had been buried in research. In the last few days, he'd made a breakthrough in his memory manipulation work. Previously, he'd used a crude technique to protect Hagrid's memories, obscuring Hagrid's recollection in a way that would thwart probing, but which still left odd gaps if someone examined it closely. Now he'd gone further. He'd developed a spell he called the Rationale Dream Curse. The name captured its design, rationale, meaning it makes the false or obscured memory seem natural and acceptable. Dream to convey the subtle, infiltrating way it worked. The spell didn't simply hide a memory like a Fidelius charm. It rewrote parts of someone's recollection so that the altered segments felt reasonable and seamless. Investigators would still see the memory, but accept it as ordinary. The falsehood would even shift to fit the investigators' expectations. There were trade-offs. Where Moe Moxie Knee's shield could be cast directly and passively protect a target, the rationale dream required prolonged personal contact to infect and settle into another's mind. People skilled in memory arts, teacher-level wizards like Snape or others, could notice the interference and break it. The spell also demanded periodic maintenance to preserve the altered memory's plausibility. Dylan was working on ways to make it silent and self-sustaining. To refine it, he'd spent long nights probing other charms, portkeys, the Fidelius, memory charms, and he'd used Hagrid as a test subject in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid was willing and unskilled in wizards' memory defenses, so Dylan could test the rationale dream on him safely. He'd successfully protected the parts of Hagrid's memory that concerned Norberta and his connection to Dylan, making those recollections seem natural to anyone who checked. All that research had kept Dylan busy and away from Harry and the others. Harry hadn't complained directly, so Dylan assumed things were okay. But the Dursleys refusing to sign meant Harry might actually be left out of the trip. Dylan narrowed his eyes. If the Dursleys wouldn't sign, then McGonagall couldn't authorize Harry to go. It sounded like the plot's original roadblock, no intervention needed from Dylan. I should be around Harry more, Dylan admitted to himself. Lately, he'd been so focused on Hagrid and memory work, he'd neglected his friends. As they rounded a corner, Dylan saw Harry with Ron and Hermione. Ron was indignant. I don't see why McGonagall knows his guardians and still won't let him come to Hogsmeade with us. Right? Hermione said, trying to soothe Harry. We won't let him get lost. Dylan moved closer, ready to join them and do what he could. Chapter 207. Can young wizards even go to the Three Broomsticks pub? Seeing Dylan walk over, Ron sighed helplessly. Dylan, you have no idea how speechless Harry's aunt and uncle are. Dylan blinked. I know. Ron fell silent. Harry watched Dylan and Ron, pursing his lips. You guys go first. He stepped back and leaned against the cold stone wall, the chills seeping through his clothes. Ron opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. Hermione, however, shook her head. Okay, we'll be back as soon as possible. The school also said we have to return the same day. If you don't have plans, Harry, you could go to the Hogwarts library and do your homework. Dylan glanced at Hermione. Ruthless, absolutely ruthless. Did Hermione cultivate on some ruthless path? This was how she comforted people, sending Harry to the library while everyone else went out. Harry hadn't even planned to study today. I'll think about what to do today, he stammered. Hermione nodded. At last, with Ron looking back every few steps and Dylan beside them, they left through the main gate under Filch's watchful eye. A cold wind blew a few withered leaves across the stone path. Ron shivered and pulled his chin further into his new scarf. Dylan had given it to him, and he liked it a lot. Rubbing his hands, Ron grumbled, If only Professor McGonagall had let Harry come with us. She can be so strict when she doesn't need to be. Dylan glanced at him. Before he could reply, Neville said, Professor McGonagall is only doing her duty. Students without signed permission from their guardians can't go to Hogsmeade. That's a Hogwarts rule. Dylan nodded. You can't expect the head of house to break school rules. What would other professors think? Hermione agreed. Exactly. If every professor gave special favors, then Professor Snape. All right, Ron cut in. We'll follow the rules. He immediately muttered again, though. I just can't imagine. If there weren't rules, Snape could add an entire semester's worth of points to Slytherin in a single class. Or he could take away all our Gryffindor points. Maybe even make them negative. Ron fumed. Dylan's mouth twitched. Snape isn't that inhumane. Maybe not, if you don't go out of your way to irritate him, Neville added. Ron made a face. Inhumane? I'll never forget when he pointed at my nose in potions class and yelled at me for 20 minutes. Dylan remembered the time Ron had mixed up goldenrod and cowslip in potions and caused the class to explode. If you don't provoke Snape, he wouldn't have had cause to shout, he thought, and stayed silent. Hermione, meanwhile, seized the chance to scold Ron. You nearly frightened everyone to death. Because of your mistake, so many people failed their potions. Not only should Snape have yelled at you, but Professor Sprout should have given you a proper telling off too. That was the herb's fault, Ron protested, and the two of them started bickering again. Neville watched the exchange awkwardly, then turned to Dylan and found the other boy already indifferent, not attempting to mediate. He fell quiet and scanned the surroundings with Dylan. When the morning group of students bound for Hogsmeade had gathered, Filch came out, his hooked face drawn and his pointed hat perched on his head. Listen up, all of you, he rasped, eyes sweeping the line of students. Filch was a squib. He couldn't do magic, but he had been given many magical tools by Professor Dumbledore. Most of the students, for one reason or another, found him unnerving. He prowled the castle like a ghost, and the thought of being chased by him at night and ending up with detention made some instinctively wary. No running, no touching things you shouldn't, he warned, lips curled. If I find anyone sneaking off or going places they shouldn't, his eyes narrowed. You'll wish you'd never learned to walk. I'll have you thoroughly scarred before I hand you over to your dean. Keep up, don't dawdle, he added, then slammed the big doors shut and stalked away, not forgetting to threaten over his shoulder. I'll be watching. I'll be watching. After Filch left, Dylan watched his retreating back and shook his head. There were prefects on every corner. It was typical. If he wanted to slip away, he didn't need spells. His ring made him undetectable to most magical tracking. Only people with exceptional sensitivity, like Luna Lovegood, or someone with a strong inner awareness, Professor Dumbledore, for example, could notice such subtle magic. Neville, I'm going to go to Zonko's first. Are you heading straight to Honeydukes? Dylan asked. Neville nodded. Go ahead. The Weasley twins said they'd show me something amazing at Honeydukes. I'll meet you there. They split off, and Dylan strolled on alone. Ron and Hermione had separated after another tiff, and Dylan welcomed the quiet. Some students clutching saved sickles or galleons headed for Honeydukes. Others dragged friends toward Zonko's. As Dylan walked with the crowd, he noticed several students peering through the door of the Three Broomsticks and slipping inside. The pub? Those were students going into the pub, ignoring the prefects and Professor McGonagall's warning. Dylan remembered McGonagall tapping the blackboard last week. Underage wizards are forbidden to drink any alcoholic beverages, unless accompanied by a guardian. Dylan glanced at the steaming copper pot in the pub window. This was against the rules. He ground his heel into the stone and changed direction. He slipped past a few Hufflepuffs arguing about Screaming Cauldron's candy and walked straight to the pub's wooden door. I heard Professor McGonagall likes the drinks here, he murmured to himself. It's not wrong to know what an elder prefers. He followed the other students inside. A warm current of peat and sweet, slightly alcoholic steam greeted him. The pub wasn't crowded. Many of the faces were familiar third years. Madame Rosmerta, with her chestnut curls tied with a velvet ribbon and her apron speckled with foam, smiled and greeted them. The prefect who'd been watching the street walked in as well, carrying 2 mugs of butterbeer. Madame Rosmerta beamed. Good morning, Mr. Prefect. Would you like something warm? Today's butterbeer has candied citrus peel in it. Quite good, I think. Dylan glanced at the prefect. He seemed to be a Hufflepuff. Dylan didn't recognize. The prefect ordered 2 servings. Then Madame Rosmerta turned to Dylan. And what can I get you, sir? Dylan hesitated and cleared his throat. I remember the school rules say. Madame Rosmerta blinked. 3rd year? Dylan nodded. She laughed. Worried about the alcoholic version, are you? In a few easy movements, she ladled a glass of amber drink from the copper pot. Foam clustered at the top. Don't worry, this is a non-alcoholic version made especially for younger students. Professor Dumbledore himself approved the recipe at a first-year welcome feast some years back. She winked. Would you like a glass? The prefect, smiling with his 2 mugs, nodded in confirmation. Dylan felt a brief disappointment. No alcohol. Then, what was the point? Wine without alcohol was just sweet water, he thought. Still, curiosity won out. If you're serving it non-alcoholic, add a spoon of syrup, Madame Rosmerta said. Some prefer it that way. Professor Flitwick even said it tastes a lot like Honeydukes toffee. All right, Dylan said. Give me one with just 1 spoon. I don't like it too sweet. Madame Rosmerta blinked twice at his phrase, sweet water, and laughed heartily. She poured and handed him a mug. There was no alcoholic smell. Dylan took a cautious sip. Warm syrup slid down his throat. It was unexpectedly good. How is it? She asked. If I like it, I'll bring friends next time, she said, smiling. I just learned a way to make marshmallow foam with a special powder. It goes down very well. Sounds good, Dylan answered. He finished his mug and ordered a large one before leaving, after paying, of course. After staying in the Three Broomsticks for more than 20 minutes, he stepped back out into the cool Hogsmeade air, the sweetness of the butterbeer still warming his chest. Chapter 208 instantly drooled with fear. Dylan headed into Honeydukes. A good number of young wizards were in the shop. As soon as he stepped through the door, he heard Fred's loud voice. Dylan, you're finally here. We've waited so long, the daylilies are almost cold. Daylilies was something Dylan had once mentioned to Ron. Somehow, the Weasley twins had picked it up. Dylan looked toward the sound and saw Fred and George by a shelf, and beside them a boy with a classic short-cropped hairstyle, Lee Jordan, a friend of theirs. I thought you'd be here earlier, Fred called. We hurried over but didn't see you for ages. I went to get some drinks, Dylan said, approaching slowly. George sniffed the air, leaning toward Dylan. Wow, is that butterbeer? Why did you go to the Three Broomsticks? I should have gone there to find you sooner. Fred chimed in, and you could have bought us a drink. George grinned with mock regret. Such a shame. Dylan rolled his eyes. You made a name for yourselves with those protective charms last time. Don't tell me you're short on money for drinks now. Fred put on a mock-wise face and leaned closer. Every penny saved is a penny earned. George laughed. Madame Rosmerta's drinks are brilliant, smell irresistible, and the best part, they're the underage-friendly kind. Fred steered Dylan toward another shelf. Come on, I've got something to show you. He let go, and with a little flourish, drew a fizzing Whizbee from a sample box, spinning it on his fingertip. Dylan suspected Fred had picked up the flashy gestures from Lockhart. What are you doing? Dylan asked. Shh, just a trick. Fred suddenly clapped, opened his hand, and the single fizzing Whizbee multiplied into two. Dylan looked at the candies, then up at Fred. Want to bet which candy's a prank? It's nothing. Dylan won't be scared, right? Boring provocations don't work on me, Dylan said dryly, then reached into Fred's sleeve and casually pulled out the original candy from a hidden pocket. Neither of these looks like something you can eat safely. He rubbed it once and tossed the genuine fizzing Whizbee into Fred's mouth. So sweet, Fred bit reflexively, let the honeyed sweetness bloom on his tongue, then snapped to attention and scowled. Dylan, that's not fair. You used divination again, didn't you? That's cheating. How boring. Fred mumbled the candy, trying to regain his composure. The sample box has the best stuff. The stuff you usually hand out is missing something. Do I need to use magic to expose your sloppy sleight of hand? Dylan asked. You saw my trick? Fred's eyes widened. George waved it off. He's from a Muggle family. Of course he knows stage magic tricks. Fred looked disappointed. I wanted to surprise Dylan with a trick. Dylan shook his head. You're learning stage tricks instead of practicing proper magic? If you can do real magic, why learn tricks? They told him how Arthur Weasley had been messing about with Muggle stage tricks over the summer and had shown the twins a few, which were easy enough for an adult wizard to hide with magic. The twins had nagged him to teach them, so they'd picked up a few moves, enough to impress the gullible, not to really master the art. Dylan had no particular opinion. If he wanted, he could perform stage tricks flawlessly, but he pointed out the difference. Stage magic is deception. Real magic creates reality. Both warp expectations, but the goal's different. The real heart of a trick is the misdirection, visual bias, psychological suggestion, he continued. Technique without that is meaningless. Technique's just another way to fool someone. Fred and George listened, half comprehending but clearly impressed. You really know magic and tricks, Fred said. My father used to show me tricks, Dylan added with a small smile, mostly because Mr. Hawkwood had performed them to please his wife when Dylan was small. He did it more for my mother than for me. Your father must be interesting, Fred said, eyes alight. We'll have lots to talk about with him. Dylan smirked inwardly. Mr. Hawkwood only indulged him occasionally. The twins' hopes were probably misplaced. So what did you want to show me, aside from this flawed trick? We've been underestimated, George protested. These two prank candies are just the appetizer. With a practiced flourish, they produced a paper bag between them, Fred and George separating at the elbows to pull it free. Lee Jordan, who'd been watching, clapped. Clap, 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 Fred beamed theatrically. We present Weasley's exclusive prank big gift bag, specially prepared for you. For someone who's always supported and helped us, George added, and even given us ideas. We appreciate you, Dylan, the twins said in unison. Dylan's curiosity was piqued. He took the paper bag from them. Their faces lit up as he peeked. Is it all your new prank stuff? Right. Loads of items, each with its own use, Fred said. But you'll have to try them out yourself. We're not telling. And don't use magic to predict what's inside, George warned. That's cheating. They exchanged a conspiratorial look. We put a real present in there for you. We think you'll find it. You've got the knack. Dylan turned the bag over in his hands. Thanks. But why is the bag a little ripped? The twins froze. George scratched his head. My mom uses those for groceries. I poked a hole in one and grabbed it by mistake. Fred looked guilty. Hope Molly Weasley won't scold you when she sees it. She won't scold you. She'll scold us, they insisted quickly. Really, don't worry. That's not exactly reassuring, Dylan muttered. Still, he was amused. He felt the shapes through the craft paper, some round like fizzing whizbees, some with angles he didn't recognize, and a few small, lumpy glass bottles. He guessed the bottles were prank potions. He'd advised the twins about potions recently. Maybe he'd show Professor Snape later. He lifted the bag. Thanks. This should keep me busy for months. I'll look for your real gift little by little. The rattling inside made Fred and George grin triumphantly. After a while, the twins, with Lee Jordan in tow, left for the Three Broomsticks. Dylan watched them go. The pub now offered non-alcoholic options, so younger wizards could enjoy the atmosphere. He put the Weasley prank big gift bag into his panel space, wandered Honeydukes a bit longer, bought more sweets, partly for Coleball and a few to give Luna when school resumed, and stowed them away in his panel. Outside, Hogsmeade had pumpkin lanterns clustered on the cobbles, and the air was tinged with sugar and icing. Dylan slipped into the shadow of an alley, activated his shadow ring, and vanished. He pulled out A, plus a few Dementors he kept under his control, and quietly brought them with him. The ring cloaked them too. Leading them toward the Ministry's temporary Hogsmeade office, he noticed how the air dragged cold in their wake. Passing young wizards shivered. When he reached the iron gate, he frowned at the pumpkin lantern padlock, a little jack-o'-lantern with an orange-yellow flame flickering inside. He tapped his wand at the lock, tempted to break it, then changed his mind and phased through the wall instead. There was one guard inside. Beyond him stood a cluster of Dementors. Dylan's stomach dropped. He was instantly drooled with fear. Chapter 209, Lord Voldemort's Daughter. Or not. Dylan chose not to attack the remaining Dementors in the Ministry. He wanted to drag them all back into his pet world, but that would have caused a public scandal and brought even tighter scrutiny from the Ministry of Magic on Hogwarts. He could have ignored the surveillance himself, but if Sirius was recaptured before he could meet Harry, nothing he did afterward would make any difference. Lord Voldemort's name carried no real weight for Dylan here. The 7 Dementors, A through G, were bewildered. They were free? The demon simply let them go? They clustered together, sensing the location of their master, even though Dylan was invisible. From the other side came an intensely aggressive gaze. To their surprise, the Dementors felt something akin to wonder, something like the pleasure they got from sucking out a wizard's happy memories, but not quite the same. This new sensation felt like joy from deep inside. It turned its hood to look at its companions, and for a moment a complex, unfamiliar warmth surged through it. Was this what humans called wanting to cry for joy? Dementors did not cry, of course, but the feeling was undeniable. They scattered, bewildered and oddly elated. Dylan watched them go and sneered. Born of extreme negative emotion, and you still feel this positive emotion without draining anyone's happiness? He shook his head and slipped away. By the outpost door, the Ministry wizard assigned to feed and guard the Dementors heard the commotion and scolded them. Dylan ignored it and drifted toward Hogsmeade instead. He ended up at the rundown house Lockhart had bought there, a shabby little refuge, barely furnished, dust thick on the floor. Several small footprints crisscrossed the dust. He frowned. The prints were not masculine. They were a bit small. Woman, child, or goblin? Goblins, he knew, sometimes slipped into derelict houses to see if anything valuable remained. But these footprints belonged to someone human. Dylan slipped through the low wall of enchantment around the property and floated silently to the bedroom doorway. The curtains were tight and the room dim, but Dylan needed little light. A woman stood examining the drawers, searching with quick, practiced hands. She wore a faded gray-black robe embroidered with subtle serpentine patterns on the collar and cuffs. Her silver-blue hair was held back with a leather cord. A few curls fell across a pale face. On her left ring finger, she wore a silver ring, its surface engraved with a pattern like the Dark Mark, smaller, more intricate than a standard Death Eater's brand. The hem of her cloak lifted as she moved, revealing boots with coiled snake embroidery. "She's a Death Eater?" Dylan thought. Her accent clipped and slightly slurred toward southern Britain, but she emphasized certain words strangely. She muttered in frustration as she searched. Where on earth did he hide that blood diamond that affects unicorns? It has to be here. That old man, he makes things difficult, even disappearing. She pulled open drawers, checked corners, all as if she expected to find something specific. Dylan drifted closer. He had planned to nab a few Death Eaters during the tournament, either to experiment on or to use in his pet world, so he hardly hesitated. When her hand touched the doorknob, the wooden panel behind her creaked. A voice queried from the shadows, "What are you looking for?" She spun, startled, and found herself facing a cloaked figure with the hood half lowered, face hidden. "Who are you?" she asked cautiously, stepping back. Dylan's voice, cold as an ice-laced blade, answered from the hood. "Miss, it's impolite to ask a question without answering." The woman sized the figure up and laughed a brittle laugh. "Hiding your face, like one of my father's old followers." That mention of father made something click for Dylan. Lord Voldemort's daughter, Delphine. He narrowed his eyes and let the name form on his lips. Then, without hesitation, he spoke the command word, Imperio. The imperious curse cut in cleanly. The woman's pupils dilated in shock. Seconds later, they dulled. Dylan sifted through the mental filaments the spell offered. The girl believed she was the daughter of Lord Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange. Memories showed it plainly, but not unequivocally. Oddly, there was no sense of Voldemort's particular aura about her. Dylan had spent a long time studying Horcruxes and Voldemort's nature. He could smell a pure-blood lineage a mile off. An almost instinctive sense he called a kind of foolishness, not stupidity, but an unmistakable signature of old pure-blood houses. Delphine gave off a strong pure-blood aura, yet it didn't contain Voldemort's unusual signature. If anything, her pure-blood scent was exceptionally strong, too pure. It suggested she might be the child of two pure-blood wizards rather than of Voldemort, who was not pure blood in the traditional sense. Her memories, under Imperio, reinforced the contradiction. She believed she was Voldemort and Bellatrix's daughter, but there was no direct memory of a father figure like Voldemort. Dylan could not find any obvious explanation in her mind. What he did find made his interest sharpen. Lockhart had dealt in black market trades with certain Death Eaters. He had hidden a treasure in this property, a blood diamond, rumor had it, crafted by a Death Eater alchemist from a unicorn's heart, thestral feathers, and the obsession of a dark wizard. It was said to be able to influence, perhaps even control, unicorns. Delphine had been told as much. She worked for a figure called Carthus, the Pilgrim of Death, gathering funds for him. She had learned through Mr. Borgin of Nocturne Alley that Lockhart's Hogsmeade house might hold the diamond. She had come to find it, either to capture unicorns alive with the diamond and sell them to Borgin, or to present them to Carthus himself. Dylan's original plan had been to capture her. He had even considered dragging her into his world to be used as he pleased. But as he sifted her memories, the thought of enslaving someone who believed she was working for Carthus felt suddenly petty, almost sinful in its own way. He clicked his tongue, released the imperious curse, and then used a gentle charm to soothe her mind, undoing as much of the imperious damage as he could. Delphine blinked back into awareness. Her pupils shrank, and she swept her silver-blue hair aside, eyes snapping to him with guarded hostility. "Don't look at me like that." Dylan stepped forward. "Fool," he said lightly. "You don't even recognize me?" At his words, a mark flared, a dark symbol bursting into the air from his palm. Delphine's face went pale as she realized what it was, the dark mark. But the dark sigil did not linger. It projected itself like a needle of shadow and sank into her skin, embedding itself over her wrist like a brand. "Since you're following my trail," Dylan said, "let me be able to find you whenever I need." Her pupils constricted so violently her wand clattered from her hand. It was an old, battered thing, nearly broken. She groped for it, swallowing. You are. Chapter 210, Unicorn Blood Diamond? You called me father? I heard you were begging for my whispers. Delphine stared, stunned at the black-robed figure before her. Carthus, the Dark Lord who had risen in her most desperate dreams and struck down the Ministry of Magic, stood in the ruined room like some awful oracle. She couldn't see his eyes beneath the hood, but she felt them on her as if two coals were burning through the fabric. She had seen this face again and again in her sleep. A rainy night, the black lake overflowing, a throne crowning a throne room of shadow. Fragmented images returned to her like a fevered film. Whoever towered above all creation in those visions was always this man. At first, Delphine had not understood why she dreamed of him so often. She had only found out from sources in Nocturne Alley, from Mr. Borgin, that the death pilgrim, Carthus, had proclaimed her his chosen and most trusted follower. The news stunned her. In her eyes, Carthus was a god waiting to overturn the world. He made Lord Voldemort look petty by comparison. To Delphine, Voldemort was a fool who could not even keep his own child safe, a bungler killed by a baby, hardly fit to be called a Dark Lord. Tom Riddle, the true Dark Lord? No. The name she had come to worship was Carthus. Carthus did not reveal himself often, but when he struck, the Ministry had been helpless against his sorcery. Those facts only cemented Delphine's dreams. Follow him, she told herself. With him at her side, she would purge her shame and stand before the world in a posture that would force everyone to look. She would take the respect the purebloods had denied her. She would erase the memory of scorn. Together with Carthus, all living things would bow. She had hardly taken this all in when the black-cloaked man materialized out of the mist in front of her. The breath left her. "It really is you." Her voice crumbled to dust. Carthus raised one hand and flicked it. Her dropped wand rose to hover, then fell neatly back into her palm. "Surprised by my appearance?" He stepped closer, the grace of his movement carrying a soft, oppressive gravity. The tip of his wand pressed under her chin and lifted it gently. Not hard, but with a touch that sent a current up her spine and made her knees feel weak. "Rummaging through filth in this decrepit hole, were you looking for Lord Voldemort's pride? Wake up, little Death Eater. See who you should truly pledge your allegiance to." Delphine's breath hitched. A single word slipped from her before she could stop it. "Father?" She stared at her own breathless confession and was startled by it. Carthus's hooded face registered a flicker of interest. "Don't call him by that useless title," Carthus said, narrowing his eyes. "From now on, you only need to know." His fingertips traced the line of her lips, and magic flared. The dark mark under her skin throbbed, reacting as if to a key. "I am your king." It was unclear whether Delphine truly was Lord Voldemort's daughter. Carthus remembered details from the imperious interrogation. She had been born before the final, great battle, and already looked nearly 20. The timeline didn't add up. The brief, involuntary word had shocked him. She was achingly like Bellatrix in her fanaticism. Delphine gripped her wand. The dark mark thudded in tandem with her heart. The touch on her face made her laugh, a little crazed, eyes bright with devotion. "Yes, my king." She dropped to one knee, pale silver-blue hair spilling around her face, but her voice flooded with rapture. "I will give everything to you. I swear on my life." Carthus stepped back to put space between them. He could see how ridiculous it would look if she were kneeling at his feet. He snorted softly. "Oaths. Mortals gild their chains with gold. They are cheaper than life." "Get up," he said simply. Delphine scrambled to her feet. "No, I will follow you faithfully." Watching her shoulders tremble from need, Carthus allowed himself a moment to consider the girl. The imperious confession had revealed most of her life, a harsh, twisted childhood, rejection and cruelty shaped into fanatic love. No wonder her heart was so bent. The father slip had unnerved him. He was younger than she seemed, but he let it pass and changed the subject. "What about the blood diamond? Have you found it?" Delphine flinched. How do you know about the blood diamond?" Carthus smiled, amused. "Mortals hide things in shadow, but shadows are my province." Her face flushed with shame. "Forgive me, master. I couldn't find it." "Fool." He cursed the word as if by reflex, enjoying the way it sounded. The sensation of scolding someone and having them quake with reverence pleased him. No wonder people like Voldemort ruled by flattery and fear. Carthus raised his hand like a blade. Golden motes formed, his wand traced a rune in the air, and a wave of mental power swept the cottage, peeling wallpaper, warped rafters, dust in the corners. Every hidden crevice opened to his mind. Delphine's searching had been sloppy. Not long after, a loose brick in the corner faintly glowed. "Go! Get it!" Delphine hurried to the spot, pried the brick free, and found beneath it a bronze box streaked with green rust, its lid carved with intertwining vines. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. Joy shone on her face as she carried the box back to Carthus. "Open it," he ordered. Her hand hovered, then lifted the lid. Black light crawled from the cracks. The bottom of the box was padded with something soft and pale. Karthus recognized it instantly as unicorn fluff. Centrally placed on the fluff lay a rhombus-cut blood diamond, its deep red tipping toward black, set in a twisted briar silver mount. The cut was brutal and irregular, like claws had gouged its facets. Dark red sigils crawled slowly across its surface like veins, turning and knotting into shapes that might have been hearts or fragmentary unicorns. A faint, high keening seemed to seep from the stone. Within it hung solidified black drops of blood. Karthus toyed with the stone between his fingers. A light in his mind revealed the broken outline of a unicorn for a moment before fading. "This is the eternal night lament," he said. Delphine stared as if the jewel had been forged for her alone, its grotesque beauty reflecting her own. "A cursed object carved from a unicorn's heart, and it calls itself eternal night?" Karthus scoffed. The unicorn's curse lingered. From some angles, the name fit. He studied the jewel. A terrible, tight curse thrummed from it. When his fingertip tapped a facet, the dark runes writhed like oil on hot iron. Thorns burst up along the briar mount, and the sigils crept up his wrist like poisonous snakes. Karthus snorted and, with a sudden backhand, grabbed the back of Delphine's neck. She cried out as the curse patterns leapt from his palm into her throat. The girl dropped to her knees, silent screams trapped in her mouth, and spiderwebbed greenish-black veins began to bloom under her skin. The unicorn heart jewel could bend and twist a mind. To use it was to take some of its corruption into oneself. A pressure like a mountain pressed on Delphine's mind, warning, forbidding, and in the same pulse promising that whatever she desired must be done. She clenched her teeth. She had sworn her life. Pain was nothing if it made her useful. She had to show herself worthy. She would endure it. "Curses like hosts," Karthus said, still holding her chin, "but a curse can be guided if you know it." He brushed the last trace of the curse from his palm, watched the girl's contorted expression, then tapped his wand. "Analgesia charm." Silver-gray motes washed her brow. The acute agony ebbed into a dull, numbed throb. Karthus watched for a moment, satisfied, then bent over the jewel again. "Unicorn blood, the heart's essence," he murmured, sniffing at it. A sweet scent rose with darker, fouler notes. Karthus grimaced. "Reek of a dark wizard who never bathed in 10 years, he said. "Truly disgusting." He examined the mount. Each thorn on the briar silver had runes of blasphemy etched into it, old marks of ancient dark lineages. The silver itself had been steeped in malice until it had gone a sickly bluish gray. Some fools, centuries ago, thought they could use the blood of a holy creature to forge a perfect artifact, Karthus said. They poured their obsessions into it, but pure things boil their pride into a paste. He felt the diamond's power, violent, chaotic. It might once have been intended to control a unicorn directly, but over the centuries, its design had been corrupted, its function broken. Now it's simply contaminated, not guided. Still, the twisted sigils within were interesting. Perhaps with study I can refine it, he thought. His knowledge of alchemy was considerable. He had even understood the principle behind the time turner. He was closing the lid when something in the briar setting stopped him. Along the groove that held the stone there appeared to be not one, but 3 recesses, more than enough to hold multiple stones. "Strange," he said, and his eyes glinted with a new, quiet interest. Chapter 211, The Eye of Finality. Could there be more than one of these blood diamonds? Dylan watched the thornflower silver setting and the blood diamond in the box without a sound. 3-petaled thorn design, 3 indentations. He tapped the empty right-side indentation with his knuckle. Only one of the 3 cavities was filled, the blood diamond sitting there like a lonely gravestone for the other 2 missing gems. He picked up the silver setting. The room around him was dim. Only the blood diamond threw off that strange mix of black and blood-red light. Shadows of the flower's twisted branches crawled along the walls, until for a moment they looked like countless withered hands clawing up from the earth toward the jewel. The design's exquisite. This object had research value. Delphine watched him carefully from the side. Even though she couldn't see, she could feel the change in his mood. It made her, freed for a time from the unicorn curse, almost giddy. Useful. Was this what it meant to be useful? She thought of her father, of the whispered fortunes he had left behind for Death Eaters. What good was that money if he was dead? Better for her to take it and give it to the great Carthus. Her fanaticism flared. All right, I'll take it. You did very well. Dylan placed the unicorn blood diamond and its thornflower silver setting back into the copper box and closed the lid. Delphini's face flashed with ecstatic devotion, then fell into a humbled bow. If you need anything, I will give everything for you. He had not understood at first why this girl would worship him, imagine him as an omnipotent god. But after he had taken control of her soul and read through her memories, the thinking became clearer. Dreams. Delphini had built her faith on a handful of dreams. Combine that with the brutality of her childhood and everything fit. She was not merely a fanatic, she was a wounded, self-made zealot. All right, I'll cast a spell on you. No one will be able to get information about me from you. You don't have to do anything, just relax. His voice came low from under his cloak. Delphini neither hesitated nor resisted. She fell to her knees as if it were the only thing she could do. Dylan's mouth twitched under the hood, but he said nothing. He raised his wand. Mnemosynovail! Silvery white starlight burst from the wand tip like scattered diamonds, coursing down the shaft and unfurling into spiderweb ripples in the air. Threads of silver light wound themselves toward Delphini, centered on her kneeling form, quickly weaving a cocoon that crawled over her skin. Runes crawled up from her chest and arms until they reached her brow. All the light converged into a single point between her eyebrows. When the final filament settled, bubbling silver specks flickered in her pupils. For a breath, fragments of memory unraveled and remade themselves. Then those pieces were shelved behind an invisible mental barrier. Memories tied to Carthus collapsed and blacked out like star clusters swallowed by a black hole. Only her knowledge of Dylan and of herself remained accessible. Everything else he had chose to shield was inaccessible. Dylan had chosen Mnemosynovail because it could be cast quickly and cleanly. The door of reasoned dreams still needed prolonged contact and refinement to work without containment. He couldn't bring Delphini back to Hogwarts and keep her there. He needed her free to collect treasures, to act where it was inconvenient or time-consuming for him to go. Mnemosynovail would do the job, and he had improved it after the time Hagrid was questioned by the Ministry. He had not yet used the updated charm on anyone normal. His experiments had mostly been on Lockhart, whose memory and pain responses had long since been disrupted. The result of that was a skewed baseline for what counted as a normal reaction. Delphini let out a burst of pain as the spell finished. She slumped weakly to the floor, unable even to remain kneeling. Dylan frowned. He had expected a reaction, but not such a strong collapse. He waved a finger, and a gentle tide of magic lifted her and set her down more carefully. Healing spells flowed through her body. Within moments, she righted herself. Tsk, he muttered under his breath. I can command all kinds of dark arts, but this healing, it never seems to reach perfection no matter how I practice. Delphini felt the warmth of the healing, and it stirred something soft and unfamiliar inside her. No one had healed her before. People had hated her, yes, punished her, expected her to fend for herself and lick her wounds. Now, her master showed her mercy. She lifted her head slowly, eyes hazy with tears, looking up at the cloaked figure she had come to worship. Dylan could sense the emotion through his legitimacy and from the memories he had sifted. He knew why she was like this. He also knew that he could not give her an easy way to contact him. If he let her reach out freely, God knew what acts of zealotry, what unpredictable devotion she might perform. If anyone else traced those acts back, it would be trouble. He needed control. Leave, he said at last. Master, how will I know if you call for me? If I wish to summon you, the dark mark I left on you will tell you, he said. If your life is in danger, I will sense it. He kept the contact methods minimal. Recruit followers for me, and I will give you power. Dylan raised his palm. Out of thin air, an eyeball appeared, pale bluish-white, with a vertical slit pupil and spiderweb veins. The whites of the eye seemed to roil with a murky shadow, as though something alive writhed deep inside. A snake's eye refined into an alchemical object. Dylan tossed it to Delphini. She snatched it and swallowed. The eye twitched twice in her hand. Holding it will make others instinctively fear you. Unleash its power, and your enemies will be trapped in endless illusions, Dylan explained. But do not underestimate your enemies. Do not use it recklessly. He had made the object from the characteristic power closest to him, the Eye of Finality, bottled into alchemy. The Eye of Finality had three functions: Snakebane of Finality, Serpent's Curse, and Fear Feedback. Snakebane of Finality could freeze any snake approaching him. For other foes, meeting the gaze would pull them into an illusion and subject them to an overwhelming, unending fear of a serpent plague. Serpent's Curse could convert Parseltongue into chapters from the Worm Apocalypse, a conjured book that straddled reality and illusion and could infect minds. Fear Feedback served to amplify Snakebane's effect. By combining Serpent's Curse with Fear Feedback, Dylan could imprint the power onto a physical object. This snake eye was not made from one snake. He had peeled it from a large number, hundreds, perhaps thousands, then used his abilities to give it the same malign properties his body possessed. Fortunately, his pet pocket world generated creatures on its own and reproduced them, so he had not wiped out species. The galleon he had spent to access and stock that pet world had been worth every coin. The little ecosystem, once populated in the right way, would adapt. Creatures Dylan introduced would become part of the food chain, and the world would record and perpetuate them. If they could not integrate, they would be excluded. Dylan had learned to place new creatures so they filled ecological niches instead of becoming invasive anomalies. That way, the world itself would sustain them, snakes included, and he could harvest what he needed without collapsing the balance. Delphine held the eye with both hands and felt its mental pressure. She could imagine the ruin it would bring down on anyone who attacked her. She looked up at Dylan with shaken reverence. "Thank you for your mercy. I will use it to guard your absolute will." Dylan gave a cold laugh. "I don't expect you to surprise me. Take all the treasures you have collected to Borgin and Burke's. I will come collect them." "Yes, master." Delphine left with her resolve burning brighter than ever. She would prove herself the most devoted of believers. She would gather the wealth and followers he asked for and show him her worth. Chapter 212. Soul Delphine was about to say something more, to reaffirm her loyalty to her master, when the chill that had clung to her evaporated in an instant. She started, looking up slowly, and the figure that had been standing before her was gone. Sunlight pierced the gaps in the clouds and painted the dark mark on her skin. Disappointment prickled through her. Had her master left without even saying goodbye? When she thought of him, she felt a submission she could never quite control, as if she were meant to kneel. He radiated a coldness, colder than a Dementor. Now that chill was being drawn away in small bites. Delphine hugged her arms around herself, sat down, and buried her face in her knees. The house was shabby, and, with the weather turning, damp, tiny beads of moisture dripped from the corners of the wooden roof. She clutched the glassy eyeball in her hand and coaxed soft motes of light to ripple from her palm, dispelling the gloom. She felt no fear. In fact, a single thought pushed up in her chest. Those who love you won't make you wait long in the dark. She couldn't remember where she'd heard that, and she didn't believe her master could love her. Yet so what? She wouldn't let him remain in darkness. He should be the death singer who walked into the light. "I will do my best for Master's great ideal," she murmured. Her whisper echoed faintly through the empty room. She rose, padded 2 steps forward, and ran her hand over the stone slab where he had stood only moments before. The coolness of the stones sank into her skin. A morbid, determined expression settled over her face. After he left Lockhart's house, Dylan shed the Karthus disguise. He frowned once, then sighed. He had planned to convert Lockhart's cottage into another safe house, but instead he was left holding a blood diamond whose use he could not yet identify. He hadn't seen many unicorns lately. The herd had seemed to be in trouble. This blood diamond wasn't a current refinement, but it was set in silver and looked as if 2 more gems could be fastened into it. If those stones also had power over unicorns and wound up in the hands of other dark wizards, they could be used for grotesque purposes. Dylan had already claimed the unicorns as his asset. He hadn't had time to secure them fully. He hadn't even finished subduing the hippogriffs, but he would not allow anyone else to touch his herd. If unicorns appeared in my pet world, could they become part of the food chain? He wondered. Unlikely. Unicorns were simply too strong compared to ordinary creatures, and they were not combative by nature. They wouldn't fit cleanly into a predator-prey loop. Still, if he gathered even a portion of the herd from the Forbidden Forest, they would provide abundant experimental material. He didn't linger in Hogsmeade. Most of what needed doing there was done, and the most pressing matter no longer required his presence. Delphine had found Lockhart's property, and he could allow her to use it as a stronghold for now. He had only instructed her to consolidate the wealth she had with Borgin, but Dylan was confident that the unusual young witch would live there often. He planned to return to his workbench and research spells to make the house legally, magically, and politically unassailable. Hide it sufficiently as Delphine's so neither goblins nor others would come knocking. Back at Hogwarts, Dylan went straight to the dormitory. He'd had butterbeer and snacks in Hogsmeade, so he wasn't hungry. 1 cup of butterbeer, hot and filling for a young wizard not fully grown yet, was often enough. Pushing open the dormitory door, he expected emptiness. Instead, he found Harry sitting alone. "No training today?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. Harry had heard the door and assumed Ron and the others had returned. He blinked to see only Dylan. The question about training surprised him. He forced a smile. No, Wood went off to Hogsmeade to buy some things. He mentioned a special place. He's been looking forward to it for ages. Dylan thought for a beat and then guessed correctly. The 3 broomsticks. Even a third year could get a non-alcoholic drink there, and older students might be sampling real butterbeer. No wonder Wood hadn't dragged Harry off to training. Beer is a rare treat. Dylan produced a bag of snacks from his portable space and let it hover towards Harry. "Try these. I brought new things from Hogsmeade. I think you'll like them." "Thanks, Dylan." Harry placed the bag on the desk and tore it open. He plucked out a pink fruit tablet and popped it in his mouth. Strawberry sweetness bloomed, and the cool candy made his face brighten. "If I'd known you weren't training, I would have brought back a few more cups of butterbeer," Dylan said. He regretted it a little. "Does Hogsmeade sell beer to minors?" Harry asked around the candy, surprised. Dylan smiled. "Surprisingly, yes, but the landlady claimed the drinks for students are non-alcoholic. Special brews, beverages designed for minors." Harry's eyes widened with curiosity and envy. "I want to try that too." "Right now, Ron and Hermione are probably at the pub," Dylan said. "When I left, it was crowded with students." "Why not send a letter asking them to bring back a few barrels?" Dylan suggested. Harry hesitated. "Wouldn't that be a bother?" "It's easy. Just send a letter. They're the ones who have to lug the drinks back." Dylan shrugged. "Okay," Harry agreed. Dylan opened the window and called Luna, the snowy messenger owl. He wrote a short note, fed Luna a strip of meat, and watched her sweep away in a flurry of white feathers. "Wait for Ron and the others in the dormitory," he told Harry. "I doubt they'll be back before dinner." "They'll push it until the prefects haul them home," Dylan added. Harry laughed, and then Dylan set his small travel trunk by the bed. Harry didn't beg him to stay. Maybe he'd learn to be alone sometimes. He'd had plenty of that at home. Dylan slipped into his private space and took out the unicorn blood diamond he'd taken from Lockhart's house. With Delphine present, he hadn't been able to apply all his methods to study it. Back on his own turf, he could. Where had Lockhart gotten it? A purchase? A theft? Lockhart liked stealing other people's adventures for his books. Maybe he had taken a trinket with no idea of its true value. Or perhaps Lockhart bought a cheap cottage with a secret purpose, collusion with dark wizards, bargains struck outside Hogwarts to bolster his position at school. The problem was, Dylan had used so many spells while controlling Lockhart that the man's scattered memories were wiped. He might never learn the truth unless he could restore those memories. Dylan reflected on his research into souls. Memory loss wasn't truly absolute. Human souls aren't illusory. The fact that Dementors can feed on them proved that. Superficial memories might be missing from conscious thought, but they often persist somewhere deeper. Dylan liked to think in technological metaphors. Memories are the files on a hard drive. The soul is the central processor. Deleting a file only hides it from the desktop. It can still sit in the recycle bin or be recoverable from deeper sectors. Memories are threads woven throughout the soul. His copy of Soul Arcana Research had outlined 3 layers of the soul: the surface layer of current consciousness and emotion, the middle layer of personality and instinct, and the deepest layer, the repository of all memories. That framework convinced him recovery was possible, but difficult. To retrieve memories buried deep in the soul required mastery of soul mysteries. Fortunately, Dylan had quite a few soul spells, several of them at maximum level. Finding memories pushed down into the deep soul would demand time and care, but it was within reach if he applied himself. Chapter 213, Riddle. Why hasn't Lord Voldemort, that idiot, taken over Hogwarts yet? Creak. After feeding Norberta and Coldball, Dylan pushed open the door and stepped into the little wooden house. A salty sea breeze mixed with the scent of pine from the forest drifted through the gaps in the boards. Afternoon sunlight flooded the single room. None of the lamps were lit. Dylan had set them to come on only at night. He walked to the workbench and set a box on the scarred wood. Inside lay the unicorn blood diamond he'd taken from Lockhart's home. The rhomboid gem's surface shimmered with strange, writhing patterns, like a heartbeat. Just as Dylan was about to begin his tests, the copy of Tom's diary he'd tossed into the corner trembled violently. A wisp of black mist seeped from a large crack along the diary's cover. The mist condensed into a human shape, Riddle's face forming out of shadow. Perhaps because Dylan hadn't been generous with the diary's vitality, the apparition looked younger than before. "Where did you get this thing?" Riddle demanded. Dylan glanced at him coolly. "After all this time, you still haven't learned to speak properly?" Riddle's expression flickered. He wanted to snap back, but didn't dare. "Damn it, what is Lord Voldemort out there doing? Why hasn't he taken Hogwarts yet?" "Just you wait," he thought furiously. "When I rule the world, I'll find that insufferable child and make him suffer 1,000 times over." "Cut the theatrics," Dylan said abruptly. "What do you know about this diamond?" Riddle's soul form twitched. "I was wondering where you got it." He tried to sound casual, but his voice trembled. "If this thing could attract unicorns, then don't tell me anything irrelevant. If one word of what you say contradicts what I already know." Dylan let the threat hang in the air. Riddle swallowed. "I don't know everything. It should be one of the 3 holy diamonds. I had one, once." "The 3 holy diamonds?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. 3 blood diamonds made from unicorn hearts?" "That's what the stories say," Riddle answered. He shrank closer to the diary. He clearly couldn't maintain his form long. "Legends claim an ancient dark wizard used the hearts of 3 adult unicorns, blood from their entire bodies, and refined them into 3 holy diamonds. When they were made, that dark wizard was cursed and died. The diamonds were scattered. Supposedly, if you bring all 3 together, they grant any wish." Dylan snorted. "Sounds like nonsense." Riddle nodded. "When I found one in a lake tomb while searching for materials, I couldn't find any wish-granting power. The stone is strongly cursed, yes, but it didn't match the legend. What I learned from it was the wonderful, terrible properties of unicorn blood." Dylan rubbed his chin. "If you knew about them, why didn't you try to gather all 3? How could it be that simple?" Riddle snapped. "Who even knows if the legends are true? I didn't see any special power, so I didn't waste my time. I had other priorities." He thought of the many tasks Voldemort had presumed he had to manage. Dylan had to suppress a smile. "Even so, you still ended up in my hands." Riddle glared but said nothing. He was trying to hide his fear. "So what is this diamond actually for?" Dylan asked. Riddle's face darkened. "Based on my research, it's primarily a curse and an attractor for unicorns. The legend about wishes is false. More likely, the 3 diamonds together could be used to summon and then control many unicorns, pure creatures. That's the use my diamond indicated." That fit Dylan's impressions. He glanced at the stone on the table. "Where's the one you had now?" Riddle shook his head. "I'm dead. How should I know where my old things ended up?" "Are you sure?" Dylan pressed. Riddle hesitated, then added reluctantly, "If you track down some of my former followers, you might find where it went. And Old Deng, an old immortal, protects a unicorn herd now. If any last diamond exists, he could have it. Or you could ask Grindelwald. He might know." Riddle's face brightened at one thought. Perhaps Dylan would leave him be for longer than usual if he gave useful information. Dylan's lips twitched. "That's somewhat useful." Riddle relaxed a fraction, until Dylan's expression hardened. "Not useful enough. Your vacation is over." "No," Riddle began. Avada Kedavra! A streak of green hit the diary. Riddle shrieked as a wisp of black smoke sloughed off him. He could only maintain a fragmented form, missing limbs. Dylan flicked his wand. There's nothing I can't do. Riddle's tiny, shredded shape lay beside the diary, an arm's length of miserable shadow. I don't like your expression, he croaked. Crucio! Riddle's howl tore through the little house. After the second curse, Dylan felt a rush of satisfaction. His mood cleared. One more question, he said. Where do you think the last holy diamond is? Riddle's form had shriveled further, now less than half an arm in size. His soul-cracked skin clung to invisible bones, breath rasping. He gurgled out, I don't know. Then, panicking, he babbled, like I said, old Deng protects a unicorn herd, or Grindelwald, that's all I know. Dylan's eyes were hard as knives. Riddle hated the way the younger wizard looked at him like a piece of refuse. He was powerless to resist. He wanted to spit, to curse, to cough up blood, but could do nothing. Dylan waved a hand. Far away, in another place, a nest of cockroaches and snakes burst apart. Flesh and gore fell to the ground, yet their life essences were siphoned magically. Dylan drew that raw vitality into the diary, and slowly Tom's broken form stitched back together. The scarred cover reformed, the inked eyes cleared. Healing finished, Dylan left Riddle where he was and turned his attention back to the unicorn blood diamond. He worked late into the night, studying the gem methodically. The diamond was heavily cursed, certainly, but its functions were limited and specific, directed mainly at pure creatures. It was an alchemical creation, a unicorn's heart and the blood of an entire unicorn forged into a gem. Anyone holding it near a unicorn could interfere with the creature's reason. But Dylan had little respect for such amateur mind afflictions. He could already unhinge minds with spells like his evil eye Cthulhu or with the power of his end serpent pupils. In addition, activating the diamond with magic generated a blood mist that drove affected animals insane. Creatures started biting their own kind. Wounds cut by the diamond turned cursed. Mundane healing magics could not close them. Dylan suspected a wounded unicorn would not heal normally. Without unicorns to experiment on in his world, he had reached the limits of what he could learn. Satisfied that he understood its core properties, he put away his instruments. When Dylan left the suitcase space, Harry wasn't around. He crossed to the Gryffindor common room and found it already bustling. The evening feast was near. Percy had students lined up and was shepherding them toward the fat lady's portrait. One by one, they filed down into the great hall, which had been decked out for Halloween. Dylan glanced around, impressed. The decorations were outstanding. Hundreds of pumpkins carved with grotesque faces lined the walls, candlelight spilling from their hollow eyes and jagged mouths. The orange glow cast warm halos and dancing shadows across the stone. A swarm of silver-gray bats, transfigured by Professor McGonagall, circled the high ceiling, their wings scattering tiny points of starlight that glittered off the gilded chandeliers and sprinkled the long house tables. 12 orange velvet banners hung from above, their edges embroidered in dark gold with snarling ghosts and twinkling wands. Blue ghost flames hovered and writhed in the air, refusing to nox, shifting shape with the eddies of magic. Now a screaming banshee hovering through the crowd, now a grinning pumpkin bobbing on an updraft. Candlelight, bat shadow, and flickering flames braided together into a living, magical tapestry that made the hall atmosphere both mysterious and festive. Dylan sat with the others at a laden table. Roasted turkeys hissed and glowed. Mountains of pumpkin pies sat with golden crusts and rich, sweet fillings, topped with fresh mint leaves for garnish. Plates of sizzling sausages sent up meaty aromas that made his stomach grumble. He smacked his lips. Hungry. Chapter 214, The Madman Who Crawled Out of Azkaban. After a satisfying meal, the pumpkin lanterns in the great hall suddenly winked out. Neville, sitting beside Dylan, shivered. What's happening? Don't panic. It's part of the performance, Dylan murmured. Neville nodded uncertainly. Cold mist rose from the marble floor's cracks. The flames on the candelabra leaned oddly, and countless distorted shadows crawled across the walls. From behind the tapestries, wisps of translucent silver drifted and coalesced into stately old ghosts wearing tall hats. One of them raised a finger, and hundreds of ghostly blue lights circled the pumpkin lanterns. A pale blue glow descended from the ceiling, bathing the great hall in an eerie, moonlit pallor. Dozens of ghosts emerged from beneath the students' long tables and began to dance courtly steps down the aisles. The most sensational sight was nearly headless Nick. His head hung askew from his neck, connected by a web of taut muscles. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold!" Nick's voice buzzed from his hollow chest. As the ghosts narrated, the air in the hall seemed to twist, and music, coming from nowhere, grew more impassioned. Time shifted back a century. The students gasped and laughed as they watched Nick being led to a guillotine, the executioner raising an axe that came down with a glittering flash. Then, of course, Nick was fine. He was already nearly headless. The ghost's axes couldn't take his head cleanly. The image was dramatic but harmless. Still, the performance sent the great hall into a riot of excitement. The students' cheers boiled over. Dylan nodded silently. Who had thought to stage a ghostly musical and to have a ghost reenact his own beheading? It was audacious. The ghosts bowed in midair, the candles relit, and the applause went on. Hermione tugged excitedly at Harry's sleeve. Ron forgot his pumpkin pie. Even Neville, flushed and wide-eyed, clapped enthusiastically. "Wow, that was amazing. Thank goodness we don't have executions like that anymore," Neville breathed. Dylan glanced at him and remembered, not for the first time, the odd experiments he'd performed, how he'd once needed intact biological heads and had beheaded a few Cornwall pixies and goblins to get them. He answered dryly, "Yes, now it's more likely your mind will be eaten by Dementors." Neville's smile froze. "That's still scary." When the Halloween feast finally ended, the students of all four houses left the warm hall one by one. The mood lingered. Everyone seemed buoyant. Moonlight threaded through stained glass windows, throwing mottled light along the Gryffindor Tower corridor. As the Gryffindors prepared to return to their common room, they noticed something wrong. The corridor was packed with people. No one was entering the portrait hole. Dylan approached and felt a familiar sinking. Trouble was starting again. He pinched the bridge of his nose. On a day when he had planned to rest, things had to happen. "Excuse me, coming through. Please make way." Percy's voice cut through the murmurs. He elbowed his way to the front. Dylan stayed at the back of the crowd with Neville, who was visibly nervous. "What's wrong now?" Neville whispered. "I think someone got into Hogwarts while we were at dinner," Dylan said. Neville's eyes went wide. "What?" "Don't panic yet," Dylan replied. "Let's see what the professors say." Percy reached the portrait and frowned. "Why are you all standing here? Can't anyone remember a simple password like dung bomb?" He cleared his throat and pressed forward to the canvas. Then he froze. This, his teeth chattered and he stepped back, voice cracking. "Go quickly. Find Professor Dumbledore. Hurry." At Percy's alarm, the corridor fell back. Dylan and Neville peered forward. The fat lady's portrait was a ruin. Jagged tears like claw marks scored the canvas, the painted surface peeling to reveal rough burlap, and the frame hung crooked. Neville's face drained of color. "Oh my goodness, what happened?" he whispered. "Don't panic," Dylan said calmly. "Looks like an intruder tried to get in. The fat lady refused, and the intruder attacked her." Neville gaped at him. "You mean someone tore the fat lady to pieces and hid in our common room? How terrifying. Could it be a monster?" He tried to move with the crowd, then hardened and pressed himself behind Dylan. If anything could handle it, he told himself, it would be Dylan. But the sight of the shredded canvas kept his fear alive. "Relax," Dylan added, studying the debris. "There's no sign of the fat lady among the rags on the floor. Portraits in Hogwarts have their own little worlds." He thought of the portrait work he'd asked the professors to help him create. Teaching a canvas to be fully human took years. She probably fled into another painting. Is that possible? Neville stared at the torn edges, which were chewed and clawed, and felt a small relief at the thought that the fat lady might be okay. Footsteps approached. Professor Dumbledore arrived in a flurry, the silver beard floating behind him, his robes stirring like a storm. He tapped his wand, and several blue flames broke free, illuminating the mess. Professor McGonagall followed, breathless, her checkered hat slightly askew. She gripped her wand and scanned the corridor with watchful eyes. Soon, Snape and Lupin appeared as well. Lupin crouched and picked up a piece of canvas with his wand. "This doesn't look like an ordinary attack," he said. Snape sneered. "Either dark arts or a monster has slipped into Hogwarts." In either case, we must find it, Lupin said. Dumbledore's voice carried calm authority. If the fat lady has hidden in another portrait, we must find her to learn what happened. He issued orders. Minerva, alert all professors to search the common rooms. Severus, check the secret passages. Lupin, send owls to patrol the towers. Filch, examine every painting in the castle. I want the fat lady found. Dumbledore's gaze softened for a moment at the sight of the trembling students. Children, return to the Great Hall. I cannot permit you to wander until we have investigated. A cold wind stirred scraps of canvas, and Peeves shot out from a shadow, dangling upside down over the crowd with his usual grin. Hee, what a scrumptious sight! I thought goblins were fighting here. Dumbledore raised a hand. Peeves, do tell us what you've seen. Peeves's usual outrage melted into a brief hesitation when Dumbledore spoke to him. For a beat, he glanced at Dylan, who stood watching calmly by the wall. Peeves's expression faltered, and he quickly spun another tale. She was so frightened she tucked herself into the summer river on the 5th floor, probably hiding behind the willow, moping, he said with a stiff giggle. Her blush was white as a ghost, whiter than me. Dumbledore looked toward the students and then back at Peeves. The poltergeist cleared his throat and, seeing Dumbledore's seriousness, flipped upright and gestured wildly. His voice dropped into a coarse imitation. A great villain, the madman who crawled out of Azkaban, Sirius Black. He tore the portrait to pieces, smaller than my ripped homework. Peeves chuckled nervously. But of course I don't rip up people's homework, usually. Dumbledore raised his wand, and his voice filled the castle as if carried on the wind. Tonight, Hogwarts will be under protective charms for the duration. Children, go to the Great Hall where we will explain what has happened. But do not be afraid. Remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward in spite of it. With that, McGonagall shepherded the students back to the Great Hall. Dylan followed the stream of Gryffindors, Neville glued to his side, less a guardian than someone who needed guarding himself. Peeves shrank away from Dylan's gaze and vanished. They re-entered the hall. The tables were empty. All the food had been cleared away. Only the Halloween decorations remained. Chapter 215, I Talk Philosophy, You Talk Magic. A faint chill from the night wind seeped through the cracks of the doors. But when Dumbledore raised his wand, warmth returned to the Great Hall. The gold and silver tableware had been cleared from the long tables, and all the feast foods were gone. In their place lay neat piles of gray wool blankets and dozens of steaming copper kettles, gurgling and sending up white vapor. Gryffindor students huddled in 2s and 3s. Hermione, having clearly done something frantic a short while before, sat opposite Dylan. Her curly hair looked like a ball of yarn that had exploded. She was patting a sobbing Lavender while nervously flipping through theoretical magic defense on her lap. Ron sat close by, with Harry between them, both boys wrapped in blankets, looking worse for wear. The heavy main doors creaked open. The Slytherin procession filed in first, then Hufflepuff, many of them in thick yellow and black striped sweaters, some clutching ceramic pots Dylan guessed held snacks they'd made earlier. Finally came Ravenclaw, bearing pillows and books. The Halloween decorations were still hanging in the hall. Dumbledore stepped up onto the dais. The pumpkin lanterns all brightened at once, their warm gold glow catching in his silver beard. Children, I'm sure you heard my message. Tonight a malicious event occurred, and Hogwarts will be thoroughly searched. He looked around the room. The professors will inspect every corner of the castle. For your safety, you will lodge here for the night. Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick waved their wands in unison. The great hall doors began to close and were sealed with spells. The draft that surged through them carried the chill into the hall for a moment, only to be banished by the warmth inside. One entrance was left ajar. Professor Snape stepped forward and wrapped silver chains around the frame with a binding spell. Prefects, Dumbledore addressed the older students at the front. Percy straightened immediately. You are to guard every entrance and exit to the Great Hall. And remember what I said about courage. By fulfilling your duties tonight, you will understand that. He turned his gaze to where the head boy and head girl stood. Percy visibly sat straighter. Head boy and head girl, you are responsible for maintaining order. If anything seems amiss, The tip of Dumbledore's wand exploded into blue light that billowed like a flock of doves. Ghostly shapes slipped out through the walls and converged. There's no need for you to leave this place. Summon the ghost nearest to you. Let them carry anything important to me. He finished, turned as if to leave, then paused. His eyes swept the students between the long tables. I almost forgot the most important thing. He chuckled, describing a graceful arc in the air with his wand. The dome overhead seemed to part like a galaxy opening, and from it poured countless silver-blue pinpricks of light. As those lights drifted down, each one solidified into a thick sleeping bag. Gryffindor's were red, Slytherin's green, Hufflepuff's yellow, Ravenclaw's blue. They smelled faintly of dried hay and were laid out neatly beside each table. I hope these will help you sleep. Dumbledore waved once more. The pumpkin lanterns dimmed and went knocks one by one. A few detached and floated to the hall's walls, making the light soft and low. Remember, no matter what sounds you hear, do not leave here. Rest assured, the professors and I will not let any danger breach the hall's defenses. He looked around with genuine concern, and then, with McGonagall and Snape, walked toward the remaining open door. One after another, the professors slipped through the narrow gap. When the last figure left, Snape's chain spell clicked shut. The hall was sealed from the outside. Even with sleeping bags provided, nobody wanted to sleep. The students were wired with adrenaline and fear from the day's events. Rumors spread fast. I heard Sirius Black did it, someone said. That madman escaped Azkaban and snuck into Hogwarts. Who knows what he's after? Gryffindors talked louder. Students from other houses picked up the details. Neville, wrapped in his blanket and looking uneasy, prodded Dylan. Dylan, what do you think Sirius wants? Dylan smothered a yawn and rubbed his temple. Neville had already asked him versions of the same question several times that night. He shook his head slowly. He's trying to evade the Ministry and the Dementors. That much is obvious. Neville hesitated, then pressed on. If he wanted to hide, why pick Hogwarts? And why wreck our dorms and hurt the fat lady? She's so kind. Dylan blinked. Kind, he said. You never can tell the motives of someone who's decided to do harm. He shrugged. People who want to hurt you sometimes hide in plain sight. Neville looked unconvinced. But Dylan let the rest hang. I talk philosophy, you talk magic, he thought. All right, Voldemort didn't seem to be making a big move this year. As for Sirius Black, if the man wanted rescuing from the Ministry, he didn't need Dylan's help. Hermione would manage it. If someone wanted to pull Sirius into Dylan's pocket world, it wouldn't be simple. The Ministry would notice. Experiments couldn't be conducted on someone if they were clumsily spirited away, and Dylan didn't want Sirius turned into some crazed test subject, or to bind himself to serve as a retainer. Besides, Sirius was hardly the type to deserve being made into a drooling fool. If Dylan ever did end up taking him in, it would be on Dylan's terms. Maybe Sirius could do odd jobs in Dylan's space, or if Snape needed reassigning of his rage one day, Dylan could present Sirius as an excellent scapegoat. Or I could just give him to Snape as a birthday present, Dylan mused with a dry edge. The hall kept talking. Dylan, tired, drawled, Whoever wants to deal with this can go ahead. It's late. I need to sleep. He had been planning to hang out with Coleball and the others in his pocket realm for a while after the feast and then sleep, but the collapse of the evening had pushed everything late. He settled for tossing snacks into the pet space for his companions and climbed into his sleeping bag. Before he zipped up, he flicked his wand and murmured, "Fluffy triple charm." A variant of transfiguration, the red sleeping bag Dumbledore had handed him began to plump, the fabric fluffing into something far cozier. It was still blindingly red, which made Dylan snort. Dumbledore really has no sense of aesthetics, he muttered. He cast a silencing charm on the bag and pulled it closed from the inside. He thought about getting his suitcase out, but decided the cramped space of the hall made that impractical. Never mind, he told himself. No pets tonight. Early to bed. Outside his bag, Seamus and Dean and some Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs were rehashing the day's events, dragging Neville into the center of the storytelling. When they noticed Dylan already zipped up and motionless, their voices dropped in automatic respect. "What's wrong?" one of the Ravenclaws asked. Neville leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry, Dylan used a silencing charm on his sleeping bag." "Then why are you whispering?" Dean asked. puzzled. Neville blinked and shrugged, then forced a smile and waved the others back into conversation. Luna Lovegood rose from the Ravenclaw table and drifted over to where Neville and his friends sat. Hermione, who had been bustling about worrying over things, suddenly stood, leaving Harry and Ron bewildered, and joined them. "Have you seen Dylan?" Luna asked in her usual calm tone. Neville's eyelashes fluttered. Before he could answer, Hermione cut in. "What do you want him for?" Luna tilted her head. "Is there something you need?" she asked. Hermione blinked and folded her arms. "That's what I asked you." Neville hurried in between them, hands up. "Don't argue. Dylan's asleep. If you need him, wait till morning." Hermione relented. Luna nodded at Neville because she trusted him. She had no quarrel with the boy and often saw him around Dylan. The small group dispersed into quiet chatter. Dylan slept soundly through the night. When morning came, he unzipped his bag and crawled out. The enchanted pumpkin lanterns were already dull against the real light of dawn, though they had burned through the night, an impressive bit of magic in itself. Dylan stretched. "I could have been in my big bed with my pets," he grumbled, "but instead I'm stuck in this sleeping bag." He narrowed his eyes, thinking. He still didn't intend to snatch Sirius Black into his world to be a household lackey. But if the chance came, if before Black met an end he could be pulled into Dylan's pocket space, well, from the outside everyone would believe Sirius dead anyway. Dylan would decide then whether Sirius earned any mercy or whether he'd turn him into an unpaid handyman. If Snape ever got cross enough for it, Dylan could hand Sirius over to take the blame. It was an ugly calculus, but practical. And when that day came, Dylan thought with a faint, cold smile, he'd make sure Sirius learned Hogwarts' old motto properly: don't be out wandering during curfew. Chapter 216, How Did Cedric End Up Chatting with Professor Trelawney? After an all-night search, the result was exactly what Dylan had expected. None of the professors had found where Sirius was hiding in Hogwarts. Dylan accepted it without complaint. What else could he do? If those professors, plus Dumbledore himself, the most powerful wizard around, had searched all night and found not a single hair of Sirius, then either Sirius was impossibly well hidden or something else was going on. It seemed unreasonable that they hadn't tried a trace spell. Instead, they'd relied on brute force searching. So much water had been used in their efforts that it felt like the Black Lake might overflow. Despite the extra hidden Sirius in the castle, daytime at Hogwarts went on as usual. That night, though, Dumbledore would not allow students to gather in the Great Hall. He and the staff reinforced protective charms on the common rooms of all 4 houses. And because the fat lady had not yet fully recovered from the attack, someone else would have to watch over the Gryffindor portrait door. No one volunteered. Eventually, Sir Cadogan stepped forward. Dumbledore praised his bravery and hung a new portrait frame in front of the Gryffindor door. Sir Cadogan moved in and, predictably, made Dylan the target of his attention. The eccentric knight assumed Dylan could get into the headmaster's office whenever he pleased and kept asking him to fetch Dumbledore so he could challenge the portraits there. Dylan almost laughed. The idea of this small, armored man picking fights with the headmaster's portraits was absurd, but he played the indulgent role of the headmaster toward an overeager child and simply smiled and refused. Sir Cadogan took the refusals poorly and turned to dueling anyone else who would humor him. When challengers were scarce, he did something even odder. He kept inventing ever more elaborate, maddeningly changeable passwords for the Gryffindor door. They'd switch 2 or 3, even 4 or 5 times a day. Dylan suspected the real reason Sir Cadogan had volunteered was for the thrill of controlling who got in and out. Dylan rarely had trouble. He spent his days in the library or in his own room, and, if necessary, could always ask someone for the password. Neville Longbottom, however, fared worse. The boy's memory was fragile. He would sometimes go out to tend the greenhouse and find himself locked out until dinner, only to be locked out again after returning. In the end, Neville resorted to carrying a scrap of parchment recording the passwords whenever Sir Cadogan changed them. A poor memory could be cured by a good pen. During the day, Dumbledore continued to lead sweeps with the staff, but the results remained disappointing. No trace of Sirius. The atmosphere at Hogwarts grew tense. Rain settled in and then worsened, making trips to the forbidden forest impractical. Luna had not been to the forest since the downpour began, and their meetings dwindled. Students were kept from visiting the Hufflepuff kitchens these past days as well. The professors would not allow it. One afternoon, Dylan sat in the Hogwarts library. He was an exception to the usual rule. Although younger students were not normally permitted to stay in the library unattended, no professor restricted Dylan's movements. He could come and go as he pleased. Outside, leaden clouds churned and the rain slapped the castle's spires, ran down gargoyles' horns, and dotted the flagstones. The Black Lake's surface broke into 1,000 whirlpools. Inside the library, that constant drumming felt almost comforting. Dylan had a warming charm and a dehumidifying enchantment around him to keep the moisture at bay. He had weathered storms like this before. Last year, he had used a stormy week to work on his animagus form, so the weather didn't bother him. He was curled in an armchair by the fire, reading, when a warm, pine-scented breeze brushed past him. He looked up and saw Cedric Diggory standing in the firelight. Cedric was a Hufflepuff prefect, tall and trim, rain beating on his dark blue robes, the silver-embroidered Hogwarts crest catching the flames. His damp golden hair shimmered, a few strands falling on his smooth forehead and making his kind eyes all the more striking. Dylan raised an eyebrow. If a girl had been sitting nearby, she would have been smitten. "Senior," Cedric said quietly, "is there anything I can help you with?" They were not strangers. Cedric had come to see him in the library once before. This time, he smiled politely and added, "I didn't expect that everyone's being confined to their dorms and you'd still be here reading so calmly." Dylan chuckled and shrugged. "I suppose the rumor that I'm the professor's favorite and that even Professor Snape respectfully teaches me has spread through the upper years." Cedric's mouth lifted. "I've heard people say Snape treats you well." "Pleasant," Dylan said, lowering his book, "isn't a word I'd use for Professor Snape." Cedric nodded. There was no seat for him nearby, so they spoke standing. Dylan teased, "With you as Hufflepuff's new Quidditch captain and seeker, I imagine you'll be giving Gryffindor a run for their money." Cedric blinked. He had recently taken the captaincy and the seeker position, elected just before the deadline, so their opponents wouldn't know how to prepare. Dylan seemed to know things other people didn't, and Cedric's thoughts flicked back to the image the Boggart had shown Dylan recently, the thing that had become Cedric's corpse, and to the strange titles people threw at Dylan. Professor's favorite, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, Slytherin and Gryffindor, a diviner better than the divination teacher. Cedric focused. "Actually, I came to ask about what happened that day," he said. "I met Professor Trelawney recently. I wanted to ask her something else, but we ended up talking about your Boggart, the one that looked like me. She said something dramatic. She claimed you have great divination talent and might even be better at divination than a professor." He hesitated. "I don't know how much actual skill she has, but I choose to trust her on this. Did you see something about me during one of your visions? Did you ever see my death, and that's why the Boggart turned into me? Will I really end up like that?" Dylan listened. Through legilimency, he could pick up Cedric's underlying feelings, the certainty and composure others acknowledged in him, shaded by a very human, very young fear of dying. He could understand Cedric's panic. Who wasn't afraid of death? Cedric was still a child in many ways. Any prospect of future danger would unsettle him. "You think I might have seen it and kept quiet?" Cedric asked, looking at him. Dylan had been puzzled himself about why Professor Trelawney had been talking about Cedric at all. It was possible she'd used her customary theatrics to frighten him, and Cedric had connected that to the Boggart the last time Dylan faced it. Dylan had had another plan originally. Wait, arrange a rescue, and then help secure some advantages for Cedric once he entered the Ministry of Magic. But now that Cedric had asked him directly, Dylan felt a small shift in his options. He pursed his lips. Since Cedric had come for an answer, Dylan would not dodge the question. Chapter 217, Old Deng might even die because of Karthus. Dylan looked at Cedric with a faint smile. "Are you here to ask about your future?" Cedric's eyes darted away for a moment. He pressed his lips together and then nodded. "Yes. The future is always changing," Dylan said. "How do you imagine you'll turn into a Traint?" Aren't you a Hufflepuff? Cedric started. You know what I wanted to ask. I do know. Dylan cut him off, then paused. But the future can't be nailed down. I can only tell you. Life is like a candle's flame, and death is the inevitable breeze. People will always leave this world. Cedric went pale. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. The room swam, and he had to steady himself on the table. His throat tightened so badly he couldn't speak. He bowed his head. His pale gold hair fell into his face. After a long breath, he forced his breathing to slow and his hands to stop trembling. Dylan blinked. Cedric was tougher than he'd first thought. Slowly, Cedric lifted his head. Fear still lingered in his eyes, but he forced a stubborn resolve to gloss over it. Can the future really be changed? Is there a chance I won't turn into that thing and that I won't die? He had heard the rumors about how grotesque the traint that Dylan's boggart had become was. It wasn't ugliness he feared so much as becoming something no longer human. He had no idea what could happen to make him change like that. Still, if a student could earn Professor Trelawney's extravagant praise, if the Weasley twins said Dylan's divinations had been uncannily accurate at their home, if every house dean treated him with respect, well, Dylan couldn't be weak. Cedric was young, but he chose to trust him. Dylan nodded. Of course, fate weaves and reweaves itself around your choices. The future isn't a prophecy carved in stone. It's sand flowing through your hand. You can decide it. Can I decide my own future? Cedric's brow furrowed. Trelawney's greatest prophecy had come true. The Dark Lord would be killed by the one with the power to vanquish him. That had happened. How could someone so monstrously powerful die? People joked it must have been love. Cedric tried not to let his mind spiral into the impossible. Dylan cleared his thoughts and looked at him. Don't worry, my readings aren't absolute. Maybe that traint only resembles you, like I said last time. Cedric inhaled slowly. Really? Whether you end up like that or not, I'll do my best to help you change it. He hesitated. But if the future can't be changed, what about my parents? Will they? Dylan knew what he was asking. He shook his head. Don't worry, your parents are safe from what I can see. If you did turn into that, they would grieve, yes, but I don't see that happening. Cedric rubbed his cheek with his left hand, then breathed out. They've always told me I'd make them proud. I've tried my best. He looked better after wiping his face, though his cheeks were flushed and his hair even more untidy. Young wizards aren't supposed to wander outside right now. Wash properly before you go back. Don't let anyone see you like this. I don't want to hear any more gossip about us. Dylan chuckled. You don't know. After that Defense Against the Dark Arts class, rumors that the Trent was used spread through the house. How many girls came to ask me about you? Cedric managed the barest smile. Sorry about that. Also, I'm against early relationships in principle, but if you wanted, I could recommend some girls in the house. They're nice. Some even secretly like you. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Someone had a crush on him? He was curious but didn't pry. He didn't have to use his gift to find out. Thanks, but I agree. As students, romantic entanglements in the house aren't sensible. I want to focus on studying magic. No wonder the professors praise you, Cedric said. You've got spirit. Cedric didn't beg Dylan for another divination or for instructions on how to alter fate. He knew that reading time and changing fate weren't simple services, and he didn't want to cost Dylan anything or get him into trouble. Thanks for telling me. I won't take up more of your time. He bowed slightly. I'll go now. I don't mind being bothered, Dylan said. If you have questions, come see me, but I don't think you'll become that monster. Dylan had deliberately made the boggart look like that to keep it from revealing things about himself. So his statement was true. Cedric would not become a traint. He would die someday, but not in that form. Still, Dylan hoped Cedric might become someone he could rely on later, perhaps a ministry contact. If Cedric grew into a useful ally under Karthus, one day he could help Dylan unify the magical world. There was no harm in a little ambition. After all, so many people crave power. What was one more? Thank you, I'll come find you again after I calm down, Cedric said. Feel free. After he left, Dylan returned to the book before him. Little Voldy, what a narrow view, always thinking only of killing enemies. If he'd used love or some means of winning people's loyalty, he might have ruled the wizarding world far sooner. If you destroy everyone, who's left to rule? Still, in Voldemort's twisted logic, turning everyone into obedient shades made sense. Dylan hadn't planned to unify the world, not seriously. For now, he wanted to learn, to hoard knowledge, to master spells. Maybe if he ever did learn most of the dark arts, if he ever became that powerful, he might want people to work for him, make galleons, supply materials for experiments, support him through endless trials. For now, though, he was just at the beginning of the road. He flipped a page and an image flashed through his mind. An old, shabby man with white hair and a long beard, falling from a tall tower. His hand hovered over the book. Before Sirius dies, I could pull him into my world to do odd jobs, but Dumbledore seems intent on courting death. Can I drag him in too? If Dumbledore came into Dylan's reality, would the old man dominate everything? Dylan wasn't sure. Dumbledore's desire to die had reasons. To protect Harry, to set up Snape to win Voldemort's trust, and the cursed ring that poisoned him when he searched for Horcruxes. He was dying, and he chose a death that pushed the war in the direction he wanted. As for little Voldy, one fragment of his soul was trapped in Dylan's world. Dylan was curious what mischief Voldemort would make from that corner. How would that fragment's understanding of the dark arts differ from Riddle's? That split soul and cricketing madness would be an interesting experiment. Perhaps what Dumbledore traded his life for wasn't for Snape to win Voldemort's trust, but for Snape to infiltrate Carthus and win his trust instead, Dylan thought with a click of his tongue. He stayed in the library until evening, then went to the owlery. He fed strips of meat to his snowy owl and to Luna's tawny owl. The tawny hooted happily, and the two birds pecked at the food together. Dylan narrowed his eyes. You little rascals. He wouldn't stand in the way of bird chemistry. He rarely used owls for letters anymore. Since Arthur Weasley had made that magical telephone, a call was far more convenient than waiting for an owl. Owls were trained, but they were still creatures. They took time. After feeding them, he ate and returned to the dormitory. The next evening, he bumped into Cedric in a corridor. Dylan only meant to say hello, but Cedric pulled him into a quiet corner and asked more questions, mainly about his parents. He didn't want to trouble Dylan about his own fate, but he needed more reassurance about his family. Dylan answered with a steady stream of comforting words. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Everything will be all right. Once Cedric's worries eased, he left. After that, whenever they met, they greeted one another like friends. They weren't close, not yet, but they had more interaction than before, like classmates who could talk. Dylan also thought it wouldn't hurt to turn Cedric into a future subordinate, so he didn't discourage the attention. Others in the house noticed the change too, and then the weekend came. Chapter 2 and 18, Professor Snape, why are you teaching defense against the dark arts? Dylan spent the whole morning on experiments. By the time meals were served, he made his way to the Great Hall. Ron and Harry were already eating. Neville waved him over, and he sat down next to him, Ron on his other side. Almost immediately, Dylan noticed Ron glancing at him every few minutes. Whenever Dylan looked back, Ron would quickly look away. On the nth glance, Dylan turned his head and caught Ron staring. He narrowed his eyes. What? Why do you keep looking at me? Caught, Ron scratched his head awkwardly. It's just, Dylan, have you been spending a lot of time with people from other houses lately? Dylan frowned. What are you talking about? When have I been constantly talking to people from other houses? Ron muttered. Like Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. Dylan's eyebrows shot up. That must mean Luna and Cedric. But he hadn't been chatting much with Luna. Ravenclaw had been under lockdown. And Cedric? He exchanged the occasional greeting with him at most. How was that? A lot of interaction? Dylan looked at Ron like he was mad. What are you trying to say? Cough. I'm saying Gryffindor's honor is something we should protect. Huh? Dylan was baffled. Had Ron been hit with some bad jinx in potions class? 2 days ago, Snape had been irritated with him. Did he flick Ron in the head with a wand and put in a little hex? Dylan almost entertained the idea. Are you speaking nonsense on purpose? Ron put down his fork. Don't you know? Know what? It's about Slytherin. They say their Seeker hasn't fully recovered since that last injury. So? Dylan had no idea why Slytherin's Seeker mattered to him. Oh, wasn't Malfoy Slytherin's Seeker? When had he gotten injured? And because of that, Slytherin said they couldn't play in the match right now. And Harry, sitting opposite, chipped in. Actually, Malfoy's not that badly hurt. They just don't want to play in this heavy rain. With Ron and Harry filling in details, Dylan pieced things together. So because Malfoy claimed an injury, Slytherin wants to postpone. That means they can't find a replacement seeker, so the match time changes? Right, Ron said. Dylan glared. And what does that have to do with my talking to people from other houses? We were meant to play Slytherin, but since Slytherin requested a change, our opponent is now Hufflepuff. Dylan sighed. Just get on with it. Ron huddled up, words tumbling out. Hufflepuff's captain is Cedric, and you've been getting along with him lately. You go to Hufflepuff's kitchens with Luna to cook. Now everyone in Hufflepuff knows you. So, if you, a Gryffindor, get close to them, will you cheer for Hufflepuff in the match? Ron rushed on. How long have you known Cedric? Harry's been our friend since first year. Fred and George, too. You clearly have a closer relationship with us, and you're Gryffindor, so you shouldn't be. Dylan felt a headache coming on. He waved his hand. Cut it out. When the match starts, can I actually sit in the Hufflepuff stands? He piled roast chicken on his plate and inhaled the savory smell, feeling better. I'll cheer for Harry when he plays. Ron brightened instantly. See, I knew Dylan was on our side. Dylan listened to their childish banter and shook his head. They were all still kids, arguing about who had the better connections. In the adult world, useful contacts mattered, but friendships were more investments than immediate favors. Cedric might be useful later, once he entered the ministry with his family's influence. Dylan could have Cedric help acquire things openly. Even now he had other contacts who could get materials secretly, but open channels were faster. Still, these were distant calculations. He focused on experiments and potions for Lupin, as usual. As the Quidditch match loomed, Oliver Wood's anxiety ramped up again. He wasn't just dragging Harry out of bed and keeping him up late. He started finding Harry during class breaks to talk tactics, pulling together every scrap of information on the Hufflepuff lineup, how they'd performed in the last 3 years, their habits, weaknesses. After all his training, Harry had become an exceptional seeker for Gryffindor, and Wood poured every ounce of his energy into him. He even joked, half seriously, that he wanted Dylan moved into Harry's dorm to be an extra tactics partner. But the opponent switch from Malfoy to Cedric changed everything. Wood made it his mission to memorize Cedric's every quirk. Dylan sometimes wondered if Wood spent as much time following Cedric around as he did following Harry, tracking minor details as if they could be tactical advantages. Those worries were all Harry's to carry. Dylan kept on with his work, content in other ways. On the Friday before the match, Wood called Harry away in the morning and didn't let him return to lessons. Harry arrived late to what amounted to the most dreaded Defense Against the Dark Arts class of the term. Sorry, Professor. Harry panted at the doorway, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. But when he looked up and saw not Lupin but Professor Snape, his face fell further. Professor Snape, what are you doing here? Where's Professor Lupin? Snape's cold eyes swept over Harry. He's indisposed today. A sneer tugged at the corner of Snape's mouth. 10 points from Gryffindor for your tardiness. Harry groaned inwardly. He'd already lost 20 points yesterday in potions, now another 10. Why was Snape teaching defense? McGonagall would have been fine. Go back and sit down, Potter, or are you planning to stand at the door like a statue for the entire school to admire your punctuality? Snape narrowed his eyes at Harry's hesitation. Harry recovered and hurried to his seat, trying to explain. Professor, I'm late because... Snape cut him off with a sneer. Because you were distracted by some grand mission on the way to class? Perhaps helping a troll tie its tie or debating divination with Filch's cat? Truly worthy of Gryffindor's rising star, tardiness performed with remarkable flair. I hope you won't waste the rest of my class, Snape added. If you do, I will regret allowing you to stay here. Harry shut up. He had been silenced by Snape's sarcasm before he could finish a sentence, muttering complaints about Wood under his breath. Dylan, sitting in the front row, couldn't help raising an eyebrow at Snape's barbs. He had a private amusement. He'd recently handed Snape a potion he'd brewed for Lupin, and they'd chatted about how to provoke reactions. Apparently, Snape had been a quick study. Dylan thought, not without a little pride that someone should write a book, How to Make Someone Lose It in One Sentence. The reason Snape was standing in for defense was obvious to Dylan. The full moon had just passed, and Lupin had transformed recently. He was still weak afterward. Dumbledore had intervened and, at Lupin's request, persuaded Snape to take the class. Knowing Snape's mood, Dylan guessed Snape hadn't volunteered willingly, but had been pushed into the role and was enjoying every opportunity to be caustic. After Harry sat, he couldn't help asking, "Is Professor Lupin all right, sir?" "He's fine," Snape replied, dry. "Not yet in mortal danger." "But you," Harry began. "If you interrupt me again, Potter, 10 more points from Gryffindor." Snape snapped. "And if you continue, Gryffindor will lose 50 points. Harry fell silent. Snape's expression softened only marginally, if at all, leaving Dylan wondering whether Snape regretted that Lupin wasn't actually in mortal peril, or whether he regretted that Harry had been too cowed to give him another excuse to dock points. Probably both. Chapter 219, The End of Science is Magic. Defense against the dark arts with Professor Snape gave him plenty of reasons to pick on Gryffindor, especially Harry. Of course, picking on Harry and the rest of the house took up only half the lesson. The other half was devoted to tearing apart Professor Lupin's teaching from every angle. Snape ridiculed him mercilessly, then started to teach in his own way. While he was busy attacking Gryffindor, Snape decided their progress was slow and their knowledge shallow, another excuse to lambast Lupin. That inevitably meant humiliating the students. Some of them wanted to fight back in their own way. Whenever Snape asked a question and someone couldn't answer, they would look to Dylan and plead with silent eyes for him to supply the answer. Dylan, however, refused to blurt things out unbidden. Unless Snape actually called on him, he stayed silent. It was a small tactic. Why aggravate a man like Snape? Let him have his little victories. Smiling through his barbs was far more useful than answering every baited question. Dylan regarded Snape's sarcasm with detached amusement. If you cracked under the taunts, the taunter would be satisfied. If you held your ground, the taunter was the one who would eventually run out of steam. Besides, Dylan had seen the other side of the coin. Being lenient in teaching a dangerous craft like magic was irresponsible. Magic wasn't something to be toyed with. A moment's inattention could cause catastrophe. Strictness was, in its way, conscientiousness. Dylan himself already knew far more than most. He had mastered numerous top-level spells and could adapt and develop spells on his own. He took Snape's severity in stride. The lesson that felt like a cool spring breeze to Dylan and a gale of pins and needles to most of the class finally edged to a close, despite the fact that Snape had barely demonstrated a single spell. Instead, he focused on describing a ferocious creature, the werewolf. "In the full moon," Snape said, "a cursed man sheds his human skin and reveals fangs stained with blood. They move on all fours, run in gutters, howling like beasts. Werewolves are pitiable only in that they are a danger to everyone else. They are a stain on the magical world." His description was, as usual, heavy with personal contempt. The candlelight dimmed a few degrees as Snape swept down the aisle and slammed a pile of homework onto the lectern. The dull thud made the front row flinch. If anyone had known Snape would be teaching, they wouldn't have fought for those seats. "Is this the so-called defense Lupin taught you?" Snape sneered, picking up a sheet. "Using a levitation charm to deal with a boggart, I suggest you write to your parents and withdraw your acceptance letter." "Did Lupin show you an actual boggart, or were you simply preoccupied watching others make fools of themselves?" He glanced at Dylan. Dylan didn't react. "And someone actually wrote that they fantasized about befriending a werewolf?" Snape's sneer widened. "If, on the night of the full moon, one tears out your throat, be sure to ask, through the spray of blood, whether it wants to continue discussing friendship." A boy in the corner buried his head lower. Snape's eyes narrowed. "Defense against the dark arts is not a bedtime story," he said in a voice like an ice pick. "Next week, 2 rolls of parchment on werewolf habits and defensive tactics. If I find any more idiotic ideas, feeding moon grass to pacify werewolves, you can spend the night dancing with a boggart in my dungeon until dawn." The bell rang as Snape finished. He swept out, black robes trailing. The classroom echoed with groans. Dylan packed up, There was nothing to pack, really. A light tap of his wand deposited his things into his system panel with the efficiency of habit. He walked from the classroom to the great hall with Neville, who still looked shaken. Snape had not spared him in the lecture either. Dylan thought Snape had tried to target him more than once, but Dylan had calmly answered every question asked of him, often the ones others passed to him in pleading stares. He answered crisply and completely, textbook perfect. Snape had been left no opening to sneer, and begrudgingly awarded Gryffindor 10 points. "Headache from being yelled at?" Dylan asked, smiling. Neville scratched his head sheepishly. "A bit. Defense against the dark arts just isn't my thing, is it?" Dylan shook his head. Snape's pace was fast. Lupin hadn't even finished explaining what a werewolf was, so it's normal you felt lost. "But Dylan, you answered like you already knew everything." Neville blinked. "That's because I previewed the lessons," Dylan said casually. It was, in truth, more than that. Dylan could brew potions for werewolf ailments and had other advantages, but he left it at the simpler explanation. Snape knew Dylan's capabilities and had thus pushed with trickier questions. Dylan simply parried each one. "I'm going to finish my defense homework tonight," Neville muttered. "I don't want to spend the night with a boggart." Dylan couldn't help laughing at the pale expression on Neville's face. A boggart would probably turn into Snape for him. The image of Neville dancing with a Snape boggart was absurd enough to make Dylan snort. Hermione arrived then, having been reprimanded as well. Her offense wasn't ignorance. It was questioning Snape for skipping parts of Lupin's curriculum to focus on werewolves. "Has Snape gone mad?" she demanded, a little out of breath. Neville shrank into himself and quickly scanned the dining room for Snape as if the man might pounce through the main doors. Finding no sign of him, he exhaled in relief. Nobody dared pick up Hermione's tone. Dylan observed everyone's nerves and sighed inwardly. After that class, a little madness hung in the air. Snape's intensity had rattled them. Snape himself, oddly enough, seemed steady as ever. Dylan felt the same, mostly, except for one girl whose words had prickled him sharper than any of Snape's barbs. He toyed with a piece of steak, thinking of how everyone reacted differently to pressure. Evening classes passed. Thoughts drifted forward to the first Quidditch match of the season, scheduled for the next day. Excitement masked the sting of Snape's scrutiny, until Dylan looked out a window and saw the sky. Lead gray clouds pressed the horizon. Rain hammered at the castle battlements. The Quidditch match would be played in a downpour. Bad weather was a common challenge on a pitch, but it was still disheartening. If this were a World Cup match, they'd play through nearly anything, even falling knives in theory, because the game went on and substitutions were available. At Hogwarts, however, this was still only an interhouse match, and the elements were merciless. Thunder rolled like a sleeping beast. Wind hurled thick sheets of rain that smashed into the stonework and shattered into spray. In the Forbidden Forest, trees bent and snapped. Dylan stepped outside, and the chill smelled of wet earth and rain. He walked toward the Quidditch pitch. Invisible above him, a thin dome of magic arced over his head, an umbrella made of converging charms. Raindrops struck it and skittered away, making only faint, shimmering ripples before sliding down to splash at his feet. His robes stayed dry. In his old life, he had often daydreamed about conveniences, conjuring an umbrella so ordinary chores weren't a bother, or a portable cooling device that hovered over one's head on hot days. Now he could produce those things himself. He could be the maker of those little miracles. It felt like a revelation. Science had led to inventions. Magic let him skip the middle steps. Dylan smiled to himself as the rain pummeled the grounds and thought, with a little pride, the end of science is magic. Chapter 220, The Dementors Are Coming. Or is it that competitive sports among wizards are scarce, and Quidditch is the most popular, possibly the only, competitive sport for wizards, which explains the extraordinary tolerance for a single game? From the fans' point of view, it wasn't hard to understand. By the time Dylan reached the Quidditch pitch, the storm had reduced visibility to near nothing, and there were already a lot of people packed into the stands. Despite the rain and wind, nearly every teacher and student at Hogwarts had turned out. A few people tried to shield themselves with umbrellas, only to have them blown inside out. Dylan even watched a parchment glove take off like a battered white bird and flutter over his head. It certainly looked like Madame Pince's. If the glove belonged to her, though, how could it be airborne? Dylan was still puzzling over that when someone shouted, "Over here, Dylan!" He looked up and spotted Neville's round, rain-slicked face peering through the crowd. Neville waved his wand wildly, trying to point him out. Dylan pushed through, squeezed into the narrow space, and cast a quick charm to clear Neville and the seat beside him. A transparent dome formed overhead, sending the rain sliding harmlessly down its edges. Not a drop touched them. "Dylan, can you see them? I think I saw Harry and the others coming in." The wind and thunder made everything sound muffled. People had to shout to be heard. Neville squinted into the sheet of rain. Dylan, with his magic-enhanced sight, could see more clearly. He nodded. "They're on the field? Oh, I hope they have luck." Dylan shrugged inwardly. With weather like this, luck would matter more than skill for anyone trying to find the snitch or even keep from getting blown off their brooms. Ron, sitting on Neville's other side, had been complaining about the rain. When he noticed Dylan's little dry bubble, he begged, "Dylan, help us block the rain too, please." Dylan rolled his eyes but obliged. A flick of his wand extended the charm to Ron and Seamus. The three of them sat dry while the rest of the stand was a wet blur. The match had begun, though no one could see the scoreboard clearly. People still shouted with excitement whenever someone darted past on a broom. Dylan watched Cedric Diggory, tall, sure-footed. Even in the squall, he wasn't pitching and yawing like younger players. Harry, too, was doing his best against the weather. Quidditch had always struck Dylan as odd. Scoring goals could take all day and still not decide a match, because a game ended the moment a seeker found the golden snitch. In his view, the sport boiled down to which team's seeker got lucky first. Maybe his thinking was limited. Perhaps at higher levels, like the World Cup, strategy and scoring mattered more. But the emphasis on the snitch made it feel like a contest decided by a single stroke of fortune. Around him, most of the stands were tense and quiet. Only Gryffindors like Ron yelled at every little thing. Others tried to make out who was where, largely identifying players by robe colors. Then Neville suddenly exclaimed, "I think I just saw the snitch." Ron's eyes went wide. "What? Who saw it? Where? Has a seeker moved? Which seeker? Tell Harry to go for it." He practically shrieked, spinning in his seat and tugging on the people next to him. Seamus, irritated at the commotion, finally snapped, "For Merlin's sake, shut your mouth and be quiet." Dylan ignored the bickering and turned his attention back to the pitch. A high whistle pierced the storm, and the players froze. Ron calmed down only to start pestering again. "What happened? Did I miss it?" "The game's paused," Seamus said, shrugging Ron off. "Paused? Why?" Ron demanded. "Maybe because both teams got sick of listening to you shout," Seamus muttered. Hermione, sitting a row below, had been trying to peer through the rain. She watched the players on the field congregate. Both teams, including the red-clad Gryffindors and the Hufflepuffs, seemed to have clustered. "I think Harry might need help," she said, then slipped out from under Dylan's protective bubble and pushed down her rain hood. She threaded her way toward the players in red. Dylan closed his eyes for a moment. A dozen faint, familiar auras drifted his way. He opened his eyes and looked to the left front. The feeling of Dementors. A coldness that sliced deeper than weather filled the air. Not the sting of wind on skin, but a bone-deep chill that seemed to come from the soul. He couldn't help a private thought. The sight of a large crowd, all seething with excitement, would be a feast for Dementors. For the past while, Dylan had been letting the Ministry of Magic handle the feeding of the Dementors he'd named A through G, though he missed having them around. There was a fixed number of Dementors, and the Ministry didn't strictly inventory them. As long as none were wandering uncontrolled, nobody noticed. Dylan had been taking the ones he captured into his own world space, out of reach of Ministry censors. Catching a few more and retraining them had crossed his mind now and then. Hermione hurried back, breathless and bright-eyed. "Dylan, you didn't learn that water-repelling spell from a professor, did you?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. "No, I worked it out myself, an improvement on the waterproof charm with a bit of levitation magic blended in." Hermione's face lit up. "When you used it on me, I got an idea. I ran down and gave Harry's glasses a waterproof charm, too. Lucky I learned it. He can see so much better now. Seeing clearly in weather like this could make all the difference. Dylan smiled. Good thinking. Sit down. Something's coming. Something? What something? Hermione asked, alarmed. Maybe a thing that eats your soul, Dylan said flatly. What? Hermione's face drained of color. You mean Dementors? Neville, who had been listening, stared. But how? This is a Quidditch match at Hogwarts. Dumbledore said Dementors can't come onto the grounds. Dylan didn't answer. The air itself had changed. It was colder and heavier, impossible to ignore. Conversations faltered and died. People shivered. Above the gray curtain of rain, dozens of black shapes drifted forward, gliding without wind. Their tattered cloaks billowed as if stirred by some invisible current. Under their hoods, nothing met the eye, only an abyssal black that seemed to swallow light itself. The cheering stilled. The stands fell into an awful silence. Wherever they passed, threads of emotion, laughter, joy, nervous anticipation were pulled free from the crowd and sucked into those hollow voids. Hermione's voice was a whisper. How are they here? And feeding openly. She knew what Dementors fed on, positive feelings and memories, not just a single person's worst moments. Seeing them here was wrong on so many levels. And then she thought of Harry. A Dementor had once targeted him on the train. Harry had struggled with their effects before. If they began to feed on the happiness of the crowd, Harry could be vulnerable up there on the pitch. Hermione spun and looked down toward the stands, panic rising.